Welcome to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia. Existentialism is an umbrella term covering diverse and often conflicting schools of thought. Consequently, we are not agreed on who or what is an existentialist. We simply agree to disagree. I'm David Miller, Secretary of the Existentialist Society, and our speaker today is Remco van Santen, and his topic is the missing first person, rethinking science from within. And when Remco's finished his presentation, we'll throw the meeting open to questions, comments, and discussion. So Remco, over to you.
Well, thank you, David. Am I coming through? Because you had me muted
Yes.
at one time. Fine. Okay, before I start, you can still see me, I take it.
Yes.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for making this forum available. I really salute you for the generosity of spirit. I have to say it up front because that's how I feel. I think, these sort of networks can be invaluable to share ideas, to learn from. I spent a lot of time on this, and it's just wonderful to get feedback, positive or negative or whatever. Any comments would be very welcome, and I hope that we get something out of it. So the first thing is, just a little preamble, if I might. Why am I doing this presentation? Well, it's been nagging me since I was in my 20s. And it first occurred to me when I was doing out of peak. I have a science, engineering, economics background, and I did an economics degree. And I thought, what BS is this? Because it was totally abstract from the real world. It was totally sort of mathematical descriptions. And I could sound very eloquent. I could talk about cross elasticities and demand and multipliers and externalities and all the sort of things that economists will use. But I sort of asked myself that question: what am I actually dealing with? This is it's something that it was sort of sitting there, and for years, later on, particularly in my more mature years, I realized I was seeing the world through what I had learnt, not directly. And it just meant the sort of decision making that you made was based on a conditioning. I did an MBA once, and the guy that was teaching me business finance was an undischarged bankrupt. Now, I did a quality MBA. I had to apply to Princeton to do it. But, I don't want to discredit the lecturer, but it sort of made you wonder, and it's sort of been sitting there for a long time. And again, some of you may interpret this presentation, and this is a long presentation, I must warn you, that I may be anti-science. Well, I used to be a fellow of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute. I was a chair of industrial chemistry. I got a long background. I spent 9 years at university. I learned physics to second year university. I learned to be able to do Schrodinger's equation and derive it. So I'd like to say, look, whatever you may deduce, I just wanted to share an alternative way of looking at science. And I think science is starting to shift. I'm hearing these whispers, and I'm going to share those whispers with you. And these whispers, to me, are becoming a roar. And you will see why I'm so enthused and spent many months on this presentation. A little bit about the presentation. The sections in it, and there are at least perhaps 8 sections in it, they are themed by color. So as to help you, I will have a little introductory slide and which will give you a bit of an insight what the next few slides and the theme is. They're cull. But what I had to do, because of the time limit, I've had to cull a number, so many slides. So some of the sections one section in particular is empty. I had to do it. I thought, Ram, this is getting too long. If you find the slides are too detailed, too wordy, or whatever, I'm sorry. Some are. I looked and hard at them, and I thought the only way to really do this is to present it. And if you need to know what the detail is, you can either email me or watch the video or do both. And if you, in a moment, you'll see my email address and you can email me and I'll send you, or I can give them to David to put on the site. So watch the video if necessary. What the end result is, I'd like to say that the theme is looking at your relationship and the world. And one of the glitzy words that I'm going to introduce, and it's not mine, I've read it elsewhere. It's about the gambler and the casino. The gambler and the casino. And there's some reputable scientists have said they're one and the same, because ultimately in quantum mechanics, there's a fundamental randomness. And as a closing thought, and before I throw on the first slide, I want to say that science reflects attitudes of the people to each other and to the world. Science is a mirror on the world, and the fundamental attitudes of people is reflected in science and vice versa. And you see the same in philosophy, by the way. Anyway, all that said, let us pull up that slide and let's begin the sharing process. And let's keep fingers crossed that everything is working. So first of all, I will go back to okay, we now have, let me see if I can pull it up, where I come back to your screen and start to share. All right. Now, I will want to share this and that, and I should disappear in part, and you should be seeing the opening slide of Rethinking Science from Within. Is that correct, David?
Yes, yes,
All
yes.
right. All right. So
Do you want to make it full screen?
yes, we will. Okay.
Okay.
You should be seeing it full screen. And then there's a rather enigmatic figure there with a torch in his hand, standing on a grid, and that will have some meaning in a moment down the track. My name, and below is it's outlook.com. I dropped the .com on that. Mea culpa, but anyway, you'll see it at the end if anybody wants to correspond. I made a typo there. Again, a bit of a preamble because I had to do this. It's what I'm doing is what is called an apophatic approach. It's not this, not that. Some of you might recognize those words in Advaita Vedanta, that is neti neti. I'm not offering a new theory. I'm not offering a new model or a formulae. What it is alerting you to some of the hidden structures of third-person objectivist science. In other words, this is the predominant way science is being held, and I'm saying there are things obscured by that approach. It aims to loosen the habits of mind, but not to replace them. Whatever your habits are, you've got them, and we all have them, and that's fine. But we're going to complement them. And we're doing this again in the apophatic tradition. That is by negation, not by assertion. We're going to look at the things that are being oversighted, and you can draw your own conclusions. And ultimately, to clear the space for the emergence of first-person science. Sorry, I don't want to read out all my slides, but I just wanted to make it clear that this is the approach. So here's the first section, and the theme, just to get you used to the idea, it's in black. Not for any particular emotive reason, that's just how it turned out. So, one of the problems of science is that labels are used. And once they are applied, things are dispensed with as if science will one day solve them. Now, here is an existentialist painter, and it's quite a famous painting. In French, it says, "This is not a pipe." And basically, the theme is there is a difference between the object and its representation. Now, what does that mean? To make it clearer, I'm going to introduce J.D. Krishnamurti. I read a lot of his books. And he spent a lot of time, and just to elevate him, I just wanted to, because some of you will have your woo guns out and saying, oh, this is woo stuff, this is Eastern stuff. David Bohm, who's the character you can see on the right there, spent an awful lot of time with J.D. Krishnamurti, years, in fact. And there's a lot of videos you can find on the web of a discussion of the two. And he said, and I think that's so powerful, and I have used it in one of my previous presentations, but I'm using it again here. You can read it. The day you teach the child the name of a bird, the child will never see that bird again. What does it see? It sees the word. It will see a parrot. Oh, it's just a parrot. It won't see the feathers. It won't hear the sounds. It's just a parrot. And so it's getting that mindset. And even if look, I want to say at this point, even if it doesn't all make sense, just hang in there, because I hope that by the end of this presentation, it will. And it's a label trap. And, I've called the Krishnamurti effect. Naming the bird stops scientific observation. It creates an illusion of understanding the terminology and substituting for deeper meaning. One of the problems I have, I've got all you people on the side, and it's obscuring some of my text. And I don't know whether there's a way I can avoid that.
Yes, Remco, if you go into top right-hand corner, view, and it'll give you some options.
Okay. I don't know whether I can drag it. I can drag it. That's okay. I can just drag it down there. That's all right. Let me just leave it at the bottom then. That's it. Done it. Good. Okay. So it creates the illusion of understanding. Again, labels can create a boundary between the ideas, and with it just sort of yeah. I'll just leave it for the moment. Let the words speak for themselves. And in particular, when I'm shouting, is that it provides a cognitive shortcut. For example, the observer effect. If anybody's familiar with the quantum mechanics, it's a profound and unresolved problem in quantum mechanics. It isn't in quantum mechanics. It's about reality. It's the observer effect. And look, some of you will be familiar and say, oh, yes, look, that's been resolved with David Bohm's pilot wave theory. Well, the other half of the world looks at it a little bit differently. You've got entanglement as a problem. You've got decoherence, what it is, a wave function collapse. What is that? It's supposedly straddling the whole universe. The quantum Zeno effect, all of these words will have meaning. And then we have energy. I'll come back to that in a moment. And I've got an ostrich. That's why I'm saying, with his head in the sand. And these labels obscure fundamental weaknesses to the theories and the postulates, and with an attitude of, well, one day science will resolve it. Well, I'm challenging that. Okay, now I've said energy. And we all know what energy is. Well, we think we know what it is. And a few years ago, and I asked myself the question, I said, what actually is energy? I mean, it's a fundamental of science and engineering to know and to calculate and do all the mathematics. And I've got a little illustration here of water flowing down in a hydroelectric dam, and potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. And, in the process, it's transformed into electrical energy. I mean, you can do your calculations about energy loss. But what is energy? Really? Ask yourself, what is energy? I'll come back to that. Because, the fundamental question is, what is energy in an ontological sense? Now, ontological means sort of a beingness, and I'll explain that in a moment, what it is as a thing. So here on the right here, you can see all the different equations for energy, and you can convert between the different forms of energy, including the one in the middle there, the famous E equals mc squared. So it's a sort of a causative agent without really, it has a label, but the question is, what is it? It's supposedly always conserved, but even as my last comment there, it's actually ambiguous, because there's curvature and expansion of the universe. I mean, is there really constancy in a system? Yes, no question of it. So I'm going to propose to you rather bravely that energy is just a bookkeeping term for a mysterious causal agent. And some of you will think, oh, I've lost the plot. Well, hang in there, hang in there. Okay. Dr. Stephen Hawking, a fabulous thinker, never got the Nobel Prize. I've always felt sorry that he and David Bohm and John Wheeler never got Nobel Prizes because they made incredible contributions to science. I don't have to sell him to you. But he made a statement here, and that's really fundamental to our presentation today. You can see it in black there, in bold. It is meaningless to ask whether it corresponds to reality. All they can ask is that the prediction should be in agreement with the observation. It could be made. Yeah, I don't have a fundamental problem with that. Einstein used it, and he was inspired by Ernst Mach and also Hertz to adopt that. But it's an adoption that makes me squirm because I fundamentally would like some ontology, but I'll get back to that. Now I'm going to introduce some terms because some of these words need understanding. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to be a dictionary for you for a couple of slides because you really do need to understand these terms. Epistemology is an important term, and we're going to stumble over that if you don't understand what it means. It's about how we know and what we know. It's a philosophy relevant to anybody that really wants to understand science. The word ontology, it explores what exists, whether it's independent of us, and you can read it for yourself there. Is it important? And the other one is the instrumentalists. And they see, that the theories are just tools for prediction. And that's basically what Stephen Hawking is saying. And not just Stephen Hawking, we could say mental block. Mental block. Anyway, yeah, call it a senior moment. I was trying to think of the author of the Copenhagen interpretation, the Norwegian, the Dane. Anyway, it will come to me in a moment. Sorry, somebody's probably already saying, Anyway, the major tension within science is the gap between ontology and instrumentalism. And it's where the ontologists are looking for correspondence between objective structures, and the instrumentalists are looking at it as an observer-dependent knowledge. And I'm introducing the word first person here and the third person. And in fact, I'm going to be using those a lot more. And so the instrumentalists just simply say, well, look, like Stephen Hawking, knowledge is a practical tool for prediction, and that's it. So the fundamental question then, just to make it clear, is scientific knowledge to describe reality as it is, that is the ontology, or is it merely an effective instrument for predicting, instrumentalism? Okay. And to summarize it as the third person versus the first person perspective. The bit with black highlighting is the important part to focus on. Third person, objective, external. That is when I grew up with my 9 years at uni. I adopted the third person perspective. I saw the world strongly through what I had learned at my cost, I might say, at times. And then you have also the first person perspective, and that is more subjective. That's internal. Went to a talk by the Dalai Lama once. Maybe he may not have the respect from any scientists amongst you, but he said there is space for also the first person perspective in science. Always hung there, and I thought, well, what does that mean? And I begin to understand and respect what it means. And hopefully at the end of this, you will too. And there is this other view, which is the God's eye view. Well, general relativity dissolved that because there is no absolute space and there's no absolute time. And quantum mechanics dissolves the third person view by entangling the observer with the observed. So in any system, the observer is a participant. So what's happening is that objectivity is collapsing inwards. That is, it's not out there. And I've created this little simple graphic to summarize it. The God's eye view has all frames included. Well, that's now gone. The third person can be put into their frame, and then the first person is my frame. Now that will make sense in a moment. If it doesn't, just hang in there because we'll be talking about that in the case of general relativity theory. So the first person view of the God's eye view, it's a myth, and physics has outgrown it, but still some will still hang on to it. I would argue, for example, that the Big Bang requires a God's eye view, and I'll come back to that and explain that in a moment. The Big Bang origin of the universe I'm talking about. The third person, I'm repeating myself in a way. It's getting to the point where knowledge is seen as interaction and the meaning is becoming more personal. Now, I was in Sydney earlier in the week at the Australian Museum, and I took a photograph. And if you look carefully, you might even see a reflection of me there taking the photograph. Some of you may recognize it. It's the navigation system of the Pacific Islanders. And they used a system which relied on looking at the wave patterns, water temperatures, and winds. And that's displayed by these bent reeds. And they used that to navigate between the islands. So for them, knowledge arose from direct, embodied interaction. And of course, today we use, well, before GPS, of course, and we use sextants. And that is a third person way of navigating. And you could say, well, it's obviously more accurate and it's more desirable. Well, be careful there. Let's have a look at it a bit more. An insight into the first person perspective is this example during the war, World War II. And there was this Hungarian mathematician, and he instigated a process of getting the bomber pilots on returning their aircraft to base to report on the bullet holes. And based on that and compiling the information, they were able to see the areas where there were more bullet holes than in other areas. Now, your instinct is to put more armor plating where the bullet holes are. But what's not being allowed for is that these are the survivors. These are the airplanes that survived the flak. And so it is actually the areas where there is a missing bullet holes where the airplanes require more reinforcement. It seems like a fairly banal sort of example, but the point is the first person science includes the hidden relationships, not just the visible objects. So this is just a little metaphor of the first person perspective. Now, I mentioned earlier that the world is divided. Well, I'll give you some quotes from some of the people you see at the bottom there. And I've just taken three there. And these three are Nobel laureates. Oh, look at Erwin Schrödinger. Particles are just appearances. He was a great scientist. Einstein, need I introduce him? Time and space are modes by which we think. And yet the conversation most commonly is that the space-time out there. And of course, Werner Heisenberg, famous quotation, what we observe in nature is not nature itself, but how we question. You can see for yourself there. Our view of reality is shaped by the way we ask the questions and the tools that we choose to employ. Now, this gentleman, there's an institute, there is an whoops, I'm sorry, let's go back. All right. Max Planck Institute, and you can see some of the comments that he made. There's no such thing as matter itself, he says. Thought is the primary source of matter. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. And finally, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. Now you could say, well, he said that nearly a century ago and we've moved on from that. There's nothing to contest this. It's still valid. And of course, you know, what is E equals mc squared if mass does not exist? What are we talking about? I'm going to come back to this energy thing later. It's quite fascinating. And consciousness, that's often debated. And the David Chalmers and what's his name, Dennett debates have gone endlessly on about the hard questions in consciousness and whether consciousness is what it is and existing. But they're starting to talk about it, and it's ongoing, and it's very relevant to our perception of science. Because what we're dealing with is this long raised issue, which was raised nearly 80 years ago, the dogma of the ghost in the machine of consciousness. I'll use a little of Amoebus strip here to illustrate it. So all the investigations that are done about consciousness is done from within consciousness. So how can you assess consciousness from within? And likewise, the hard problem, it's a process of self-reference. The ghost in the machine keeps cropping in. John Archibald Wheeler, an amazing man. I say amazing because, first of all, he supervised more physics PhD students than any other professor in the United States. And I think he still holds that place. Never got a Nobel Prize. But look what he's saying. This man in physics is saying, we are participants in bringing into being not only the near and here, but the far away and long ago. What a statement. Hey, eligible to be called woo? Well, anyway, he made some profound statements. Oh, another man here, Martin Rees, the astronomer royal, who's prepared to say that the universe exists because we are aware of it. Here's a man who you could sort of metaphorically consider as a man looking at the world, the universe through telescopes and whatever else. And Leonard Susskind as well. The observer and the observed are intrinsically linked. Remember, I said earlier, and I would be introducing that as the gambler and the casino. Okay, Max Planck again. We ourselves are part of the mystery that we're trying to solve. So true. All the evidence points to it. And if you're not convinced, hopefully by the end of my presentation, you will be. So what I'm saying, the implication of that is that science and mathematics don't merely uncover truth, they reveal the inherent limits of understanding of a mystery that includes ourselves. Now, I'm just going to share with you some of these labeled enigmas that fundamentally pull the rug out from so much of science at the fundamental level. And some of you may be thinking, well, that's not my world. I live in the day-to-day world, and you're talking about quantum mechanics, and that's another domain. Well, that domain is now sort of at the point of the everyday world. I mean, for example, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle has been observed by the naked eye. So Anyway, that little child is going to be playing peekaboo, and we'll see that. The double slit experiment, the most fundamental, most influential experiment for which we don't have an answer that directly challenges our perception of reality. All right. What we have here, we have a source of either photons or electrons going through a slit. You can see the slit. And as you would expect, with two detectors on either side or one side, trying to work out which way the photon or electron is going, whether it's going through the left or the right hand. That's important to take that, note that. You have two areas where you can detect that. Nothing particularly surprising about that. However, we switch off the detectors, so we don't know which way the electrons or photons are going. We get this particular signal. Now, so look at the contrast. One has, you're trying to gather some information, and you get things. And here you've given up trying to obtain the information, and you get this wave interaction. And I won't go into any further detail. I could, but just take it from me. And it was in the Time 100 top experiments in science some years ago. It's still the fundamental problem. And that's why I call it peekaboo. And that's why I got the child there. Because it's a game of peekaboo, and you play peekaboo with electrons and photons, and you can read up on it. It's about gathering information and the price you pay. The other one, entanglement. Entanglement is one of these issues where in technical terms, two electrons or photons or whatever are connected, and when they're generated together, and they can be a universe apart. I mean, they've measured it between, I think, between the Netherlands and the Canary Islands, and they found that you get instant communication. When I say instant, it's multiple times the speed of light. In fact, the question is there actually a spatial difference to account for it? So Einstein called it spooky, and he was quite challenged by it, hence his surprised look. And it questions what reality is. It questions what causality is and interconnectedness. And again, I'm just alerting you, and some of you may be sort of getting a bit, saying, well, why are you sharing all of these things? Just stay with me there and just take it in on the basis of the concept. The quantum Zeno effect, that is a really wacko one. And it's when one measures, attempts to measure the evolution, maybe a nuclear decay, for example. If you start to try and measure the rate, the process slows down, even to the point of almost stopping. And in some situations, they've actually been able to reverse it. It's a mystery. Do you get the sense of what I'm talking about the observer and the system being one? So time's flow becomes dependent on the measurement frequency. I mean, whoa, what's happening? If anybody's familiar with some Eastern thinking and Advaita Vedanta, there is the concept of what you attend to persists. These Eastern people have a lot to offer, and David Bohm has spent so much time, even Einstein spent some time with Tagore, exploring some of the ideas of the East. We tend to dismiss it, but they have something for us. And also, I might add just this final little thing. Wheeler, you might remember I introduced him, John Wheeler, the physics professor, and DeWitt created a famous equation which nullifies time. So there is no need for time in the world of science. One of the things about science that everything is symmetric except for two things, and that is entropy and time. Anyway, I'm just so what the world started with the world of science started with the ancient Greeks, and they began on the basis of ontology of things. But it's gradually shifted towards the epistemology, hence why I introduced you need to understand these terms. The ontology of things and epistemology is about how we know. And today, quantum mechanics is totally a tool for prediction and not a description. For example, the Copenhagen interpretation. There's no ontology. But there was a little bit of a backlash there. And in fact, it's more than a little backlash, but it led two people, Descartes and Husserl, both started to challenge the first-person views. And I'm introducing Einstein. You need a little history description of science, and I'm just going to show you these. You just get a bit of a feel what's happened over time. So you had originally, as with the ancient Greeks, the ontological foundation of science, and that was resisted. I've got down the bottom here in brown, I've got the resistance, sources of resistance, and they were the religious authorities. They felt that their authority was undermined by the independent inquiry. In fact, you could, under the Roman Catholic Church, you could find yourself in serious strife. And then under the Renaissance, with Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton, and again, the religious authorities opposed it, and this independent inquiry. Thomas Aquinas has, David, it's a topic I don't really have ever done Aquinas, but he was an amazing man who straddled, he was a man of the cloth, but he cleared the way. Anyway, I'm rambling on. Then in the 20th century, we have, Bacon, Descartes, and Darwin. And again, the religious authorities opposed it, and these are some of the arguments they used while they felt that it was undermining their authority. Around that time, of course, Einstein came in, and I'd rather drop this one in where he wrote and said, we're still in the swaddling clothes, and it's not surprising that people struggle against admitting it even to themselves. I think we need to stay with that. We are still in a very early stage of scientific development. I think we're being caught up with the past. Hopefully you'll understand where I'm coming from. So the resistance from people like Einstein, Bohr, whose name I couldn't think of a little bit earlier, the Dane. I don't know why I had a block against him, but anyway, that's Schrödinger. They were actually opposed by many scientists who squirmed over the notion of the classical determinism and causality and observer participating in defining reality. And then finally, we've got people like what's his name? Thomas Kuhn, Karl Popper, Prigogine, Ravelli. Carlo Ravelli is one man to watch. And they're coming back with recovering on the ontology and introducing a way of reconciling the tension between the epistemologists and the ontologists. Okay. I'm going to just show you this slide, is that the world is very much divided. And you have people like Edmund Husserl, Thomas Kuhn, these are some of the people, Niels Bohr, and the bits that are highlighted you can read for yourself. And again, John Wheeler, the observer is part of the observation. The cubists, they're people that's saying, look, the wave function describes how our beliefs are held and have nothing to do with any physical collapse. And anybody that's in touch with physics knows about what was called a collapse of the wave function or the decoherence. The cubists say, look, that's just a mathematical equation that describes how our beliefs are changed. Ludwig Wittgenstein, the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, and we'll come back to him just briefly. Science is a way of speaking. So what I'm just trying to say, there are others, these people that are talking in quite remarkable ways. Now, one of the questions is there a blind spot in science as we practice it today? I plagiarized the term blind spot from Adam Frank's book, and I'll mention that. So what are the limitations of science as it is practiced? Well, first of all, science divides things into real and subjective parts. It's reductionist. They're reductionist. That means they break things down and assume that the smaller parts contribute to explain the whole. Objectivism, they look for a God's eye view outside of human perspective. Well, we've already raised it and rather glibly dismissed it through general relativity theory, but we can come back to that. Physicalism, it reduces everything to the physical. The reification of mathematics, reification means making solid, making a thing. One example that I raise is the notion of the Big Bang, which is supposedly 13.8 billion years ago. Well, for starters, general relativity has no absolute time. So how can you have a Big Bang? And this is not just me speaking. Stephen Hawking made that point as well, and he argued that the Big Bang is happening now. In other words, it's a feature of the universe. Perhaps it's a coincidence that it was a Roman Catholic priest, Lemaitre, who in 1923 came up with the notion of the Big Bang. Perhaps he was inspired by Genesis, and hence that diagram. So, and then of course we've got consciousness again, and being used to. We use it to justify free will. Anyway, read if you like. You probably relate to all of this. I certainly can. I found myself once having to write develop Schrodinger's wave equation, and I never understood it, but I understand now what it means. The blind spot. There is a link on the meetup page to Adam Frank's to a video, an extract of the video at least. I've read the book. It's good, and he was prepared to go into some sacred territory, but I felt there were some areas that he seriously missed. Anyway. So he claimed a blind spot in science. Yes, I suppose you could say that's true, but that's not what I'm principally concerned about. Okay. So what is a blind spot? It's a tendency to ignore experience in scientific analysis. And it does it in my second point there. Science captures physical reality, but neglects consciousness, which enables it. And as Adam Frank also, made the point that, traditional science assumes a detached external observer, but it's never really truly external. And what we're going to show is that subjective experience is always indispensable in grasping reality. And my comment here, the observer idea is helped by the substitution in the workshop. Under controlled conditions, experiments create an artificial workshop. Oh, yeah. And so these abstract models out of the workshop become reality. But if, there's one thing about them, they often omit the subjective starting point. And I'm going to pick on global warming a little bit later on as a good example of how it is promoted. And my paradox, science makes us peripheral, but we're central to the comprehension. A bit of a paradox to me. Anyway. And this is the thing that often happens, is that science confuses its frameworks with reality. And we just assume these to be real because they're seductively accurate. It's like general relativity theory. I mean, it's extraordinary, and to be able to think that we've got in our pockets a mobile phone, and from that we can pinpoint our place on the Earth, and it's so easy to assume that there must be space-time. So what are some of the problems with science that leads that? Well, I'm going to put at the top, and I'm going to be brave enough to propose this, that Karl Popper, his falsifiability theorem postulate, is just a belief. And it's convenient. It cuts out. It gives you a sense of confidence to be able to dismiss things and say that's only belief because you can't falsify it. Well, Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend certainly disagree with Karl Popper. It could be a topic in itself at another time if anybody's interested, but. And the thinking that paradigm shifts are always driven by falsification. No, they're not. Well, they can be, but with care. Yeah, the concept of causal relationships and theory, the problems. These are, we haven't got time to go through it today. But, these are what some of the points that I felt were relevant. And so examples of blind spots could be time and consciousness, quantum physics, the notion of free will. As I said before, it's discussed from within the mind. Yeah, well, consciousness, we talked about that, and the thought that Earth as a system, but without really giving full regard to human activities. Ludwig Wittgenstein, as a brief introduction here, I love his philosophies. And one of the things he says that you can read it for yourself, read it for yourself, and then I'll give you an explanation. The ladder, take the ladder away after you climbed it, and then let go of the illusion that language must refer to something external. That's a bit challenging. And he says, there is no ultimate theory. By the way, Ludwig was an aeronautical engineer, and Bertrand Russell called him the ultimate genius. Well, in his early days, that's another story. So what's actually happening? I couldn't help but not include Ian McGilchrist here, because Ian McGilchrist in his book, The Master and Emissary, showed how the brain processes and what you could call the first and third person. The right hemisphere is the first person way of obtaining experience, and the left hemisphere is detached, and it's more of the third person viewpoint, objective, abstract, and impersonal. Now, some of you may have have attended my webinar on it and on this thesis. But the important point here is the left hemisphere works with information provided by the right brain. It is abstract. It works on small points of detail and creates a narrative. And they have a big advantage over those that are right hemisphere dominant. those that are first person. And why? Because you're working with an abstraction, you're using with less information. You can sound confident. You can be very persuasive at meetings. They tend to dominate. And if you look at some of the people, including the Orange Man in the Northern Hemisphere there, he's a classic left hemisphere person. And that is the problem with science, is that you become so specialized that you lose the bigger picture. And the key message from McGilchrist is that there is a current shift, and there have been sort of swings of the pendulum, but the current swing is very much to the left hemisphere view, abstract from the real world. Okay. Global warming, I alert you to it. Look, it's a catastrophe in the making. Let's be clear. It is a catastrophe. What is happening in the world with global warming? Well, I pulled up this little chart. I pulled it off the web. Nothing new. Looks familiar. You all recognize it. The numbers are just for the purpose of illustration, not to be read. We can see the impact of climate change and pollution and vegetation, glaciers are melting, the temperature. You know all this. It's all pretty ho-hum, isn't it? The first point I want to make is, why is it called climate change? I don't know what climate change is. Obviously, it's a mathematical expression. It's global warming. I mean, the world is warming. So why is it called climate change? No small point. So there is a disconnect, and this is an expression of that disconnect that I'm talking about, between the abstract and the lived reality. I don't live with glaciers. I can't see those changes. A scientist can, and you could argue that they need to be there to communicate. But how do they communicate? Well, the United Nations does on our behalf, and they have this organization. You can see the wordy name. And who attends the bodies? It's the Conference of the Parties. What? It might as well be the conclave of the priests. Sorry if anybody is associated, but to me, they're not making contact with the people. This is classic third person stuff. We need to get more to the first person and get through to the people. Life. Look, I had to introduce this because it has some bearing, and I'm going to have to talk fast because otherwise I'm going to be in trouble with David. There is a paradox about life. It creates order by consuming energy and so on. It absorbs energy so that it becomes more ordered. It's quite an amazing phenomenon. And you could argue explains the one asymmetry in science. That is the asymmetry of entropy. Entropy is always increasing. Perhaps the life is a feature, and this is the way I'm looking at it. That it is a feature of reality. Life, just like energy. And one of the amazing features of the cosmos, of the universe, are that many of these factors, such as the gravitational constant, I'll just hover on that one for a moment. If that varied by more than 1%, stars would burn out in 10 million years. Or, as they have, if it's less than 1% less than what it is, stars can't ignite the nuclear fusion. Well, I'm just going to hop through the fine structure constant. And so too, let's go on. The speed of light, if that was a little bit different, the Planck's constant or the strong nuclear force. It is extraordinary. You can't just dismiss it. You can, of course, introduce God if that's your inclination, but it's too extraordinary to simply dismiss. I have the plane here. If I'm boring you, have a think about why I might have introduced the plane, and we can discuss it afterwards. So there we have physics meeting phenomenology. Time's flow, past to future, is entropy driven, as is life. But life experiences, it's only life that experiences this flow. So I'm asking some 4 questions here. Phenomenology. Well, I'm not going to talk about it because I haven't got time. So we're going on to the next one. Oh, I did say this. That's right. And it's a worthy topic in its own right to explore. And I'm raising the question, is phenomenology unpopular simply because mathematics has seduced science with its mathematical lens? It's so beautiful. I mean, Max Tegmark at MIT, Massachusetts, wrote he wrote a book called The Mathematical Universe. I think he is forgetting that mathematics is a language for a description. But anyway, now this is an interesting one. This is fascinating. Einstein had a debate with Henri Bergson in 1922, and Henri Bergson challenged Einstein. Now, Einstein is glowing with fame. I think he had a ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue, wasn't it, in New York? I mean, he was the man of the year. But Henri Bergson challenged him, and because Einstein's theory was that only physical time is real, and Bergson, on the other hand, said, well, there's also experiential time. And he challenged Einstein in a debate in 1922, and he lost it, unfortunately. He lost it, and he faded into obscurity, but he still talked about today. I think Henri Bergson was trying to say, look, there is a gap between the observed, what the clocks measure and what we experience. And he talked about durée. And so he is trying to introduce ontology into a world of epistemology, as Einstein wanted. So to summarize it, Bergson argued that time has a between, its experience and its measurement has a between. Okay, important point. As I said, I see Henri's argument like a compatibilist. It's sort of, he's trying to take us out of strict epistemology, trying to take us into the world of ontology, but he can't quite do it, and he's sort of part of the way there. So this talk, by the way, this presentation on Bergson here has relevance in a moment. And you'll see, I like to think that my presentation is warming up. David, I don't know what I'm going over time, but so what has happened, we need to understand, is that science is developing a map, and it is a progression from Galileo with his maths to Newton, who introduced the force and his, F equals ma force, and also the explanation of gravity with that equation. And then along came Einstein with his famous equations, tensor based. I'm suggesting there is a fourth area here. We'll come into that, because what Einstein did, he put us all into boxes. And these boxes are the so-called frames of reference. And you can have an inertial frame and you can have an accelerating frame, but it requires us to be in these boxes. And these I'll say boxes, cages. And within these frames of reference, these cages, the observations differ. And so to do that, it prompts for the need for an externalized objectified belief in a space-time to reconcile these varying experiences of time dilation. And you can only get that by comparing between the cages. So this is Einstein's theory of relativity. He played a trick on us, if you like. As a classical physicist, he assumed an independent physical reality. And in these frames of reference, these cages, the experience is the same for all observers, and time dilation can only be inferred. That is, whether time is, the famous one where you go out into space, you come back to Earth, and people have aged, etc. But it assumes that assumes space-time. And I'm suggesting that space-time preserves the illusion of objectivity. So he hid the notion of subjectivity of the experience of time behind space-time. I'm suggesting that general relativity is just a mathematical formula, and it removes the subjectivity of time by assuming space-time to be real, to assume that space-time is observer independent. Well, nobody's actually seen it. You can experience it, and you can describe it as emergent, but we need to be clear what that is. And here's the key clincher. That's why I had that little box. To work out the difference between each of these frames of reference needs energy. Remember that term I introduced earlier as a question mark with it. And that's why I'm suggesting that general relativity is like a Vulcan. Vulcan was a presumed planet to explain the behavior of Mercury. This was in the 1890s or so. They observed how Mercury had a strange orbit around the sun. They said, well, there must be Vulcan out there, hence that symbol there. And so GRT has got a lot of flaws, not least of which is that 95% of the universe is not described by it. And these are some of the points that undermines general relativity theory. So the opportunity is to replace general relativity, that is the Vulcan, with energy dynamics. Not unreasonable. Okay. So it has to do with the fact you can only find out the information on these I use the word cages or frames of reference, needs the expenditure of energy. And this is in fact Landau's principle, that you can only gather information, increase your knowledge through expenditure of energy. And once you get that, you get a new basis for looking at an alternative to general relativity theory. So it's all about energy expenditure. And these are people that are questioning general relativity theory, and these are some of the names that I've mentioned. So getting back to this, these people that gradually move towards, towards Einstein and beyond. These are all first-person scientists. There's room. Oh, I made a mistake. My apologies. I meant to say here third person. I have to correct that slide. I've just made a mental note. Please read that as third person. These are all third person people. There is room for a first person formula for time, and it can be done. And I'm proposing this particular equation. We can think replacing these are forget this is over the top. It may not fully understand what I'm coming to, but there is a way to develop a replacement. by using a first-person approach. And here we have the man we had in the opening slide with a torch, or a flashlight, I should say, in the international terms, flashlight, or some parts, with the observer, a latent space-time, and an equation to describe the energy which the torch represents to expose the space-time. So this grid is a metaphor for space-time, and that the tensors for that could be developed, in my view. And this would be the sort of the basis for the equation. May not make much. So observation is an act of creation. I've got here, I'm suggesting that we are at core presuming that the universe is at its core physical in nature. It's a presumption. Carlo Rovelli produced a book, and that's questioning it as well. So objectivity has is basically, I mean, relativity dissolves the God's eye view. Quantum mechanics dissolves the third person. I've already mentioned that. So what has happened is objectivity is collapsing inwards. There is no out there. So we've got, I basically mentioned that earlier. I'm a little bit of repetition there. Okay. So what is needed is for science, we're now sort of getting to the point. We need to integrate experience with science, to include direct experience, to make clear that we can distinguish the models from the reality. So they're being conflated in current science. Acknowledge science as a human endeavor. We have to embed it into human practice. And it's not a question of nature should be mastered, but as an external object. Okay, a bit motherhood here. So the models that we use, that science uses, become the boundaries of a comprehension. And these people are starting to, you know, I mean, we've already seen hints of that. Gödel's incompleteness theorem, Heisenberg's uncertainty and relativity, all are basically barking at the heels of our current attitude to science. I mean, by that, we need to recognize that, you know, the mystery and incompleteness are fundamental. They're not just temporary gaps to be filled by science. These are fundamental. And our scientific models structure our experience, are not an independent reality. We need to get that. So I'm going to flash through a few of these slides a little fast now. You'll have to pull them up either by PDF or review the video. So what becomes of science? Now we're getting to the, you know, nearing the end, but these are the important bits. We need to recognize that the models become tools and not an ultimate truth, and that experience is foundational to understanding, that the frameworks that are integrating the objective and subjective insights. And science accepts that it doesn't uncover reality, but constructs descriptions of observations. Okay, that's an important one. And that the term ontology is simply a linguistic artifact and not a fundamental feature of reality. That might seem to undermine what I might have said earlier, but I've had to lead you down this rabbit hole progressively. Otherwise it would make sense. Perhaps it still doesn't make full sense, but stay with me. And we have to learn new ways of speaking, and by that the enigmas become irrelevant. So here are my concluding thoughts. And I'm winding up my presentation with that. Max Planck put it nicely. I think he was onto it. And Erwin Schrödinger rather brave of him to talk in terms of the total number of minds in the universe is one. In fact, the consciousness is a singularity phasing with all beings. It was very brave of this man to promote this way of thinking. So we have these terms that are being thrown about as if they're real, which includes the one I've questioned in energy. What's a mind? What is life? What is time? And again, this is the important part here. The terms time and energy, they're constructs, and we can only describe them by comparison. They don't exist in their own right. And again, the point, without energy exchange, there is no sense of time. It's also been described as time is a measure of change. Well, change involves energy. So energy is the silent author of experienced time. I thought that was a good way of summarizing it. I said he caged us. Well, I think that was Einstein did that with the belief in requiring a belief in a space-time and substituting introducing space-time to hide subjectivity. And then, of course, Schrodinger's that thought experiment of Schrodinger's cat, whether it's dead or alive. It's a belief, it's trapped us. And this little symbols is associated with John Wheeler, who I talked about earlier. Again, and Carlo Rovelli, he's going, he's coming out of an orthodox background, and he's gradually going to where I've tried to take you today. I was staying close, but one of the things he said, and it is that quantum mechanics is not about how the world is, but about how the world interacts. There was a fellow, Henry Stapp, who said there are no things. Henry Stapp was a physicist. He's still, in his 90s now, I think. Henry Stapp said there are no things, there are only relationships. Somewhat similar to what Carlo Rovelli is saying, which is basically, going in the direction of where we're going in first person. So the shift is, and the encouragement is to think in terms of relationships, and it represents a new scientific paradigm. And not to be focused on things, but on the relationships. And that's not just in science. So you could look at everyday life. You could think in terms of psychology, economics. You could question whether there is a personality, or whether the personality is just the expression of two people. And at that point, you're measuring a relationship. It's a universal thought that can be applied. It's the relationships that defines everything. And that knowledge only emerges from interaction and are not isolated entities. And ultimately, of course, the observer and the observed are interconnected. I'm going to put this more strongly, because this is my second last slide. The gambler is the casino. Another way of saying the observer is the observed. I used the word casino, and again, this is a plagiarized expression because I read it elsewhere. I think maybe it was in Henry Stapp's book or Goldstein, one of their books. Is that ultimately, quantum mechanics shows there is a randomness which upset Einstein, and he actually challenged it with. Back in about 1930, I think, for the EPR challenge, that there is an ultimate randomness, and so hence the connection or the shift from the observer to being the observed, the observer being the observed, to the gambler as the casino. Anyway, so where does this leave us? I'm just going to summarize with this one slide. I've not claimed any new truths. I'm going to be sounding a bit apologetic here, but I'm just going to put it this way. I haven't claimed new truths. I'm just trying to make visible the assumptions that we are living this world. And these assumptions are really just being traded and retraded. And we've got a fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is that we can't relate quantum mechanics and relativity theory. The small end of town can't talk to the big end of town. They're irreconcilable. And with all the other things. I'm not proposing a solution. It's just what I would call a disruption. I can't deliver. No one can deliver the first person, but we can evoke it. We can evoke it. And what we've got is an opportunity for new ways of seeing. And that we begin to recognize that science begins with experience, not with objects. And that this apophatic path that we've been down, and I do apologize for the length and the number of slides. I spent quite a lot of time, and I thought, I'm going to have to go through it and endure any criticism that it was too detailed for the time available. I'm sorry. And there are more slides that I've cut out than I actually presented, and that was after some thought. It's not this, not that. So with that, I conclude with this slide. This is my final slide. And there's a man standing there with his hypothetical flashlight exposing space-time and expending the energy. And on the left here, you say, well, is this Fox? There was this, it was an essay that was written in the 50s. Forgot the man's name. He said there are two types of people in this world. There are the foxes. They are people that walk around, as the fox does, sniffs around and gets a general sense of things. There's also the hedgehog. The hedgehog is far more particular, much more focused. But the hedgehog is also prickly. These people are prickly because their identity is associated, their career, their status. Hubris comes from the hedgehog. We need more integrated views, and with those integrated, sort of less attached views, we have a much healthier way of looking at science. And with that, I conclude. Thank you for listening. You see my email address there, we correct with a .com. I've got a couple of slides I have to correct. That's one with my email address. And with that, thank you, David. I've gone way over time, but anyway, hopefully I've seeded a few thoughts, and perhaps if I created some confusion, perhaps that's success. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rem. Now, before we throw the meeting open to questions, comments, and discussion with Rem, I have a couple of announcements. The first of which is that the next Existentialist Society lecture discussion will take place on Saturday, the 7th of June. That's in Australia. If you're in North America, it's the evening before, the Friday. And Dr. Wayne Bradshaw from James Cook University will be speaking on A History of Possession, Max Stirner's Influence on the Modern Manifesto. I'll repeat that. A History of Possession, Max Stirner's Influence on the Modern Manifesto. Now, the Existentialist Society runs weekly Zoom events at this time, and to ascertain the topics and get the links, you'll need to get onto the Existentialist Society's meetup page. Now, I've put the link to that meetup page in the chat. Now, for our questions, comments, and discussion section, we'll use the raised hand method. And for those of you who might not know where to find it, the raised hand icon is in the React tab at the bottom of the screen. And the React tab has a little heart-shaped symbol above it. So Derek, unmute yourself, please.
Well, yeah, great. Thank you very much, Remco, for that great, a review of, I think, a tendency that has been going on since the time of Kant. And I think a lot of the people that you quoted there are, we all need to understand basically what they're saying. Something that you said, that energy and time are constructs. But don't you think that's a bit glib? I mean, the world exists and there are relations within this world. And although we don't know what these relations are, even Sartre said that the brute existence exists, but we don't know what it is or how to describe it. But nevertheless, these relations um, um, do exist. And so even if we can say, even if time and energy are representations of something that's going on, I think, don't you think it's a bit glib to say that they don't exist? Or so you said that they are constructs, implying there are social constructs. Well, I mean, something is there, and we need terms to express them. So we can't say, I think, that they're simply social constructs. They might be misrepresentations, but to simply say, I mean, the concepts of them are social constructs, but the realities, I use that word, underneath them, do exist. Okay, so that's the first question that I have for you. The second thing is, yeah, great. So you've shown the subjectivity in science and knowledge. Great, yeah. But I mean, I think a lot of us can, assume that. The question is, what do we do next? I mean, epistemology and knowledge are means to an end. What's the end? Surely it resides within. I mean, this is going beyond your brief, I think. But surely what we're aiming at is something within consciousness. Not knowledge is a means to an end. I mean, that's my question. So what is the end? But I think that's a bit beyond your brief, and I think you've done, extremely well within your brief.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Look, first of all, when I talk about energy, I put it in inverted commas. And because we don't really know what energy is, the best we can say is a causal agent. It's a causal agent, and that we can quantify it. We can demonstrate how it transmutes. But beyond that, we don't really know what it is. And I think it's a very healthy place to stand and to be a little bit more honest and say, well, we don't know what this causal agent is. And it's simply a descriptor of our experience. And I'm talking like a phenomenologist now. We experience it. And that's all we can say about it. I think there's enough evidence there to yes, I was just trying to assimilate your question beyond it's a phenomena that we can describe, but we are within the system that of which we are attempting to describe this causal agent. So I don't have a problem. How can I say it beyond that, other than it's an emergent phenomena. And we need to stand aside from my view is that we need to stand aside from being a thing in the universe, and to recognize that we're integral with the universe, and whatever that form takes. It's all I can. There was a second limb to your question. Did I address that?
No.
No.
It's just that, we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about science, but knowledge is a means to an end. So what is the end? We're talking about subject
Yeah.
consciousness. You know,
Knowledge. Yeah. What is knowledge? Yeah. It's something that we draw on to uh, reduce the randomness, the chaos in our experience. Well, that's my view. That the knowledge that we have is something that's we can either purchase or experience and put into our data banks and use that to use it to anticipate what we might experience in the world, either directly or through other actions that we may take. Yeah. That's all I
yeah, I
would
mean,
think knowledge is.
I have to say that that doesn't answer my question, because I'm saying that knowledge is a means to an end. What is the end? I mean, I just want to pose the question.
Mm,
I think is very important.
yeah. Look, I wish we had a group discussion on that one, Derek. I think it'd be wonderful to continue this discussion and see what other people are saying about it. But you know, that's I don't think I can't add anything more than the view that knowledge is something that we use to minimize our experience of randomness. That's how I would take. Anyway, not to debate it because there are other people wanting to raise things, but it's a good question. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. George, your turn.
I think DLJ is next.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, George.
So, I mean, first of all, I want to say this. I want to say, and I say this in the respectful manner possible. I mean, you know, this is scientism as religion, rolling out, you know, physicists, this and that, as if they're saints, right? And you know, and ultimately, fundamentally, what I'm going to say is that science is actually quite a modest endeavor and is fully subsumed within philosophy, right? So there is no, there, you know, I want to say that there is no scientific view of the world. There is no scientific view of the world. What there are the laws of physics, and there are patterns of matter and energy. And what we do with those patterns is we develop technologies. Okay. And I think part of what you're pointing to is the idea that the laws of physics exist autonomously and independently of humans, right? They existed for billions of years, right? Now humans come along, and what we do is we start to say, look, there are patterns in the world, and we can use these patterns to our benefit, science and technology. Now, where we have gone wrong fundamentally, dogmatically, is, and then going further and say, well, you know what, maybe science can tell us about metaphysics. You know, why do the laws of matter and energy exist? Why is it that people collectively, they look at an object and will say that's a chair, or they look at something else and collectively say that's a tree? So again, there's no scientific view of the world, right? The science has taken on this religious proportion. All answers are in science, when in fact of the matter, very few answers are in science, at least the things that are most important to us. What is justice? The human mind, right? What is, how does one attain authenticity, right? So certainly, I mean, science and technology are dialectical in this process, right? But again, science is, you know, a very small aspect of human existence, and in many ways the least important aspect of human existence. And so, you know, this notion of, you know, you use the word at points talking about causation, and it, you know, even the very notion of causation is a human construct, right? Oh, because in fact of matter, right, everything interacts, right? Simply to say the cause, right? Like in other words, really in the end, what we have to say is what's the first mover, right? And philosophers do talk about this. What started these causal chains? And again, the very notion of causation, again, is simply a human effort to identify processes that we have at a moment are interested in understanding, right? So we impose causation, this notion of causation on reality, right? And I think that's some of what you're talking about. We're talking about first person notions, and so you know, and again, I thought it was very good because I mean you came down on the conclusion that yes, that science really doesn't get at the really important questions of metaphysics, and that is correct. But I'm just going to conclude on this point, which is that we have gone down this rabbit hole of science as religion, scientism, that is indeed very blinding. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George. Well, I think it's a good statement. But what comes over to me is that you're very strongly coming from the third, and you can come back on me on this. You're coming over from a third person perspective. And if you then take into account the sort of thinking of let's take Erwin Schrödinger, for example, about you know, there is a single mind, a universal consciousness, and then when you meld these two, then some of the legitimizers for a third person view, which is what you're presenting, start to soften. So the things that we have agreed on, like the chair, I think you exampled it, not I was thinking at the time when you were talking, is a societal construct.
Well, I mean, it cannot be a societal construct, right? Because chairs are recognized universally, right? It cannot, just like a smile or a frown, those are universally recognized, right? It cannot be, I mean, that's the issue again. There is, you know, again, science, that's an effort to reduce things to science, right? So then our very thought processes are a thing that we can analyze, and it is not the case. Life is not a thing we can analyze, right? You know, and so what I'll say is the third person, one thing I'll say about third person, I mean, the laws of physics exist, right? I mean, some people will say, oh, science has given us so much. Science has given us zero. What's given us, what we have are the laws of physics. And again, these reliable patterns, which we are able to utilize to develop science and technology. As a matter of fact, this hubris really extends to the question of global warming, because what is global warming but the destruction of the meteorological patterns that have allowed for the thriving of human civilization, right? And so as we destroy these meteorological patterns, we are destroying ourselves, right? So again, science gives us nothing. Science itself gives us nothing. It is reality, again, in the laws of physics, that then we are able to then manipulate and use to develop science and technology, which gives us things like global food production, things like this.
All right. Look, yeah, George, I think I get what you're saying. All I would come back is these laws of science that you called, and not describing, laws of physics, laws of science, any laws. They are describing our I would argue, are describing our behavior in response to a situation. And that's not, again, it's not an original thought. In fact, you know, I need to say this, and I'm reflecting on a comment that somebody's made on the side there. There is nothing original in what I presented. It's the collective that you know, that one has to take in, the collective view, and that collective view has me increasingly comfortable from the first person, which looks at these laws and say, well, these are attempts to describe my behavior in response to a situation, without really, you know, the force F equals ma, or whatever, you know, whatever equation you'd like to use, is simply describing my interpretation of what I experience. And it is that shift. Look, George, I think, again, I'd love to have a collective discussion on that, see what others think about it. But yeah, so laws. Yes, laws are just descriptions and created in society, rationalized, and live on their own as a third person entity. And yeah, that's all I guess. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
DLJ, your turn.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sound okay?
Yep.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Remco. Yeah, I'm always in awe of the effort that you put into making the slides. I like to think I put some effort into mine, but they never look quite as good as yours. So that is a criticism based on my own jealousy. Right, no, I was trying to summarize in my own head what the presentation was about, like if I had to explain it to somebody else. So I think you may have answered it, but I'm not entirely sure. You're arguing against scientism. Okay, got that. And therefore to be more wary of it. On the contrary, it seemed, and given the presentation title, the missing first person, it also seems like you're actually arguing for more subjectivity into science. So I'm wondering what are you saying that science should remain as aiming for objectivity, but later we ought to then perceive how subjectivity affects that? In which case I think we might be doing that anyway. Or are you saying more subjectivity is the way to get to more science, in which case we should rethink what science is?
Exactly. DLJ, that's spot on. I think that's a good summary. It's the word subjectivity is a term that we use and we throw about with gay abandon. But a way to look at it, and that's why my presentation is was so incredibly difficult for me to create, because it went against my fundamental wiring, and it goes against the fundamental wiring of society, thinking of also what George was saying earlier. All I can point to is what it is not, and so you're left with this sort of void in which we're having a discussion, and because I can't specifically talk about anything specific, it makes it very difficult to respond. The only thing I could say is subjectivity is actually the reality of my experience of the world, and it isn't, the third person description of the world is sort of an agreed consolidation. It's an agreed consolidation, and it is abstract from my experience. So the one example of a chair is often that George raised in philosophy. What is a chair? And from the third person perspective, it has a particular form and structure, and it keeps us off the ground. On a personal basis, it is what keeps me off the ground. I'm not aware. I'm sitting in a chair right now. That is my first person experience of a chair, and it is quite distinct from the third person. And so the term subjectivity is not a word that we need to use, and we get away from it by talking in terms of the first person versus the third person. And that's really all I was trying to do. It was your first person experience, and that includes time, it includes energy, it includes all the things that we've talked about. And once we get into that realm, you're getting into a very strange realm where some would argue you're getting into a solipsism, where you're, like in Descartes' reasoning, you're the only thing that exists.
Have you, just as a quick follow-up, not as a question, but sorry, it is a question. Have you had a look at Wilfrid Sellers' paper on the manifest image, where essentially the manifest image is the first person and the scientific image, the other image he talks about, is the third person. And then he recommends something to bridge the gap, and then doesn't give it to us. But it's still quite a good read if you want to see how far back that this notion goes. Thank you. Thank you, Rashi. Again, thank you for the presentation. Style is always wonderful.
Thank you.
Hey, DLJ. James, it's your turn.
Yeah, I gotta say, and hold on one second, I just need to take some of my drink.
Yeah,
cheers, mates. Down under and those Brits alike. Cheers. So I gotta say, I enjoyed your presentation. In the beginning, I liked the historical learning, the different facts that I didn't know. I thought you did a fantastic bang-up job there. And I know this isn't like a critique session. We're actually getting into the meat, but I just wanted to, I was bedazzled truly by how you put together the presentation. And like and I don't know why you got like, and I don't want to point it out, but like there was a minute there when you got a little nervous, and I don't know, and I was like, oh, I got nervous in the beginning, like you're taking your time. I don't know, it's because of the computer difficulty, but I'm just like, maybe it's because of the nature of the content of when I got into watching and actually looking at every slide of the in-betweens and the slides that just stuck right out and were big, like boom, like Einstein behind prison bars that were clearly prison bars, but kind of thin because Einstein. And it's like, are these literal prison bars or are just the prison bars of his mind that he couldn't get around the fact that like there is no God and the universe is God and or maybe there's a God because of his Jewish upbringing and all that kind of stuff. And then the guy, and I was thinking, I pointed out in the chat that the mathematician, what was his name, who came up with the idea that there's time, the clock idea about time, with time being everything in between. Well, if you think about it philosophically, and naturally, he was right, because we're born into this every organic thing and all matter except for energy is destroyed ultimately. So that he was right, that there's only the time in between, and then life, beginning of life, in between, and then death.
Yeah, James. Yeah.
Excuse me, I smoke copious amounts of cannabis, but I can't call you by your name because I think because it's like your name sounds like an incorporated name, no offense, that you would legally own my soul at that point. So,
Yeah.
bitchin' name though. It's a pretty cool name, pretty kick-ass.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, look, I'm swimming against the tide with my presentation. I'm swimming against my conditioning. I'm swimming against the very essence of what I invested heavily in a certain attitude, and I found it compelling for my own therapy.
I agree with you.
Let me just finish briefly. I just found it compelling to look at the first person perspective, and I found it extremely satisfying to see so many great minds, Nobel Prize winners included, all whispering something which is supporting this particular view. So look, there was some hesitancy on my part. There was a tension in me in trying to compact all of this in a very short time. And look, thank you, James, for your thoughts there. And yes, what you said is perfectly valid. Yeah.
Thank you, James. David, unmute yourself.
I'm David. I'm in Illinois right now, and I like the presentation very much, but it seemed to have one component missing, which would be society and consensus, because science is a social system more than anything else. It's the way people work together and publish their papers and the peer review and so on. And so I mean, I agree with the first person and third person perspective, but I don't think we need to have that. I don't think there needs to be that much tension between those two perspectives, because I'm an anti-realist anyway. I don't believe there is a reality in that context. So I think consensus is the reality that we have. It's the knowledge that we have constructed down through the centuries, and we hoist that to be a third person perspective. But it's if we look at it that way, then there's less tension between those two perspectives. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, quite true. But I think festivals have that awareness, to have the openness to consider that there is a first-person perspective, and that is really what I'm promoting here, because the third-person perspective is the dominant. It's a dominant view. It's the one that provides easy answers, and to some extent, under the banner of science, it's very respectable, and people's careers are based on it. And to step out of that, to step into that first person perspective, is like saying, you know, the view that most people hold is that we are in the universe, whereas the other way of looking at it is that the universe is in us. And that sounds you know, rather Eastern, but Eastern thinking. But it just, all I'm trying to do here is to create some opening, a softening of our resistance to the first person. It's not what we are conditioned. We're not the way we're trained. And so if we continue to maintain that lens, we will continue to separate us from opportunities for improved engagement. Hence my example of global warming, how we've made it into an abstract thing. And so much, it's not the best of examples perhaps, but it's certainly, from my perspective, an emotively loaded way of communicating. So I don't know whether I've answered your comment there, but David, but yeah, look, thank you. And if there's did I miss anything?
No, I appreciate the presentation. I really liked
Yeah,
it.
okay.
And, well, the one thing I think people the people they cling to realism, and then they don't let go of it, and they tend to place everything that they don't like into the subjective catch-all category. That everything they don't like, they throw that off, cast it off to subjectivism or idealism or whatever doesn't fit their little perfect static view of the world. And I think, well, I liked what you said. The thing we have to avoid, I think, is being like Aristotle, who did not have a scientific society to work with. It was just him by himself.
Yeah.
So when we think logically and or we want to do science or something like that, we don't have to be like Aristotle.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, David. That's good.
George, go ahead.
You know, I wanted to engage on a small part of your discussion on the question of time. And I know that wasn't the main thrust of your presentation, but I wanted to invoke that because, you know, of course, I'm familiar with this argument that somehow we live in different time frames, the time cages ideas, as I understand it correctly. But, you know, on its face, that's just impossible, because if that were true, then we could not communicate, right? We could not have a meeting of the mind because we'd be living in different time frames, right? So, you know, I know, again, and I know this is sort of taken as a given, but it just is a profoundly illogical thought. Now, the other thing is that it probably the case that what's taking place here is there's a conflating of time and entropy, right? Which is time and change, right? So time and change, by definition, have to be two different things. Time and change cannot be the same thing. And so I think that's probably where I have to imagine that's the error taking place, in that, yes, I can imagine circumstances and realities where entropy takes place at different paces, at different rates, in different times, in different places. But time, by definition, has to be a universal constant. Otherwise, you know, again, it'd be impossible for us to communicate or to coordinate. Imagine, you know, if I say, well, meet me down the street in 3 hours, if we're in different time frames, that will be impossible, right? So, you know, I just have to push back on that, because I've heard this, you know, and either there's a profound misunderstanding of what's being argued, or it's just, again, it's just an illogical thing that just does absolutely make no sense, and people have not really thought about it in any kind of serious way. Because again, I keep stressing this, it would just be impossible for us to communicate, meet, do anything if we actually did live in different time frames from one another. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George. Is anybody experiencing any buzzing noises, or is it simply on my side? No, okay, thank you. I see shaking heads. Well, look, I think, George, to respond, I would draw your attention to a book by Carlo Rovelli, who's a quantum physicist, a highly regarded quantum specialist. And he talks about time as a product of the way we focus. And he uses the word focus. And so what we see as change, is just the way our proximity to the situation creates this sense of change, and from that sense of change, we have the emergence of time. But he argues that if we stand back and replace the microscope with a telescope, for example, or just to simply stand back, that change does not exist. And so from that, he argues that time is just an experience that we have from the way that we focus at the situation. And that's his response. And
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm just going to say this, in the sense that this is in this case, this is scientism run amok. This is just, the scientists say it, so it has to be true.
Yeah.
Because again, it's just not common. It's just not. It's not only non-commonsensical. I mean, it's just laughable, the idea that we live in different time frames. Because again, how can we talk? How can we communicate? How can we organize? Right? Time has to be a universal and a universal constant. Now, again, the rates of change, it can be the case that entropy occurs at different rates in different places. But the idea that time is not universal is just, I want to say on its face, is just a laughable concept. And, again, it's just scientism run amok.
Yeah. Okay, the only thing I would say in response, and this is a generalization, the extent of your sense of I, your strength of your conviction of yourself in the world, the stronger your particular your perspective will be on the traditional side. I've found that people that are less I focused tend to be more relaxed about it, which is another way of saying right or left brain, if you like, or system one or system two with Kahneman's thinking, or with any other way of expressing it. If you are affirmed on an I, you will firmly be in the camp of Einstein with his view of time, although correcting there, in his latter years, he seemed to have substantively, and I included the quotation from Einstein about your view of time. And I think what you're saying to me is time is a measure of change. Change is real, therefore time is real. That's what I'm hearing from you, George.
No. I'm saying it's a mistake to conflate time with change. That's an error in thought, right? I mean, ultimately, our universe, the way we perceive time.
You did say, George, I did hear you, and I'll correct myself there. I was trying to collect my thoughts and listening at the same time, and I don't do that very well. If you haven't worked that out, I tend to take. I need to exit and process things. Yeah, look, yeah, you have your point of view, and it's I can't. I present alternative, and yeah.
And my only point is it cannot be a point of view. I mean, that's where you're. I mean, it cannot be a point of view, right? If we live in different time frames, how can we be having this meeting? I mean, it would just not be possible, right? Again, and so it's a baffling to me that this argument that we live in different time frames is sort of unquestioned, because again, it's a function. The physicists say it, so somehow it must be true. So I think that I have to give the benefit of doubt that we misunderstand the concept. Because again, like I said, time has to be a constant.
George, I recommend Carlo Rovelli's book, and have a read of that, where he discusses the very thing about time and how time is emergent in his view. And as I said earlier, he reasons in terms of focus. Anyway, look, it's.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, go ahead.
Thank you, Derek. was wondering if you've pondered, the problems of first person in philosophy. For example, in our normal egoistic perspective, we imagine ourselves to be a mind or an ego, viewing an objective environment. But in philosophy, there's always been the problem of the objective ego. That's where we suddenly imagine our subjectivity represented in the form of our person existing within that objective environment. So we have the ego becomes the third person. Now, of course, if we didn't undergo that development, we'd be practically running around on four legs almost. So yeah, it's the third person view is so absolutely necessary to almost every function of knowledge and development and everything that even leads to technology and philosophy and science. So that's what I wonder about when you talk about the wonder of this first person, that it is the third person that took us beyond, got us out of the trees. If we didn't have the third person, we'd be still up there in the trees with the first person, wouldn't we? I was
Yeah,
just wondering what you'd think.
good point. I always like your questions, Steve, and they're sometimes a bit roguish sometimes, but I think they're healthy questions and it helps prick some of the balloons that we carry. Yeah, look, I think it's not so much that the third person is distinct from the first person, and perhaps I need to reflect on go through my slides again and just make sure that I haven't created a binary place. That is, we make a distinction between the third and the first place. I suggest that the first place incorporates the third person. The first person includes the third person. It's not as if you've got a first person and a third person. I'm saying the first person includes the third. It's exactly the same as what I had in that slide in McGilchrist's thesis. It's the right brain includes is holistic, whereas the left brain tends to take things out of context. The out of context is what I suggest is the third person, whereas the first person is holistic.
Oh, okay. So if I start with an initial view, I am a mind viewing an environment. Well, I haven't actually projected the third person in time, but you're saying the third person was always there in the first person. Okay, I'll try and accept that one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Conrad, your turn.
Yeah, just wanted to ask you, like you're saying before, energy is a causal agent, and energy is a causal agent, and that's the most understanding that that you've been able to come up with. And you said, because I wrote it down when you were speaking, I wrote down, you said it's beyond it is a descriptor of our experience, an emergent phenomenon, right?
Mm.
And I think your whole presentation ultimately is about energy, and you even said that at the beginning. And I was actually hoping you would go into that more deeply than you did. Obviously, you had so many topics to cover. Now, my question to you is the following. All of this topic, all of this science, all of these questions that everyone's been bringing up, time, physics, religion, and here we are, we're all discussing these got all these scientists doing experiments, and they have to create models and diagrams and explanations and theories and mathematical equations, all sort of representing reality in different ways. Now, my question to you is this, related to that and related to just this very interesting idea that you said energy is a causal agent. You know, what is energy? This is absolutely fascinating. When we experience something, for example, sound or taste or sight, we could never ever explain that accurately in any words. No one's ever been able to explain that accurately in words to any alien species who had not experienced those senses. So language, it's like the limitations that we directly experience our world and our reality. Maybe an alien on another planet experiences different senses that we could never comprehend. What's your understanding of your quest to understand what energy is and your whole presentation in terms of the limitations that first we have to think about it, observe it, and then we have to translate that into language and words and communications and a presentation, for example, like you just gave. So are we coming up against a hard limit of language in this whole topic? Thank you.
Yes, that was a great question, this is what Wittgenstein reasoned, that language doesn't represent things. Language, and he came up with the term language game. And because we can't just, like your example of sound and the aliens, so too with the word game. You can't describe what a game is. This was an observation that he made. We know what a game is, but we can't describe it. It's actually quite a challenging thought. I thought about it and I thought that's very clever. But in the end, our experience our experience of the world is the language, and you call it a Lebensform, a life form, and what we experience is language, and that is what is reality. And now we're sort of going into a realm that I'm sort of starting to falter, as you can hear, because you're getting into the mystic realm. And that's where Wittgenstein ended up taking us, to the point where being at one time protege of Bertrand Russell, who thought he was he was going to take over the analytical philosophy that he was promoting. He accused him of being a mystic, and that's where I so identify with Wittgenstein that I'm going to fall into the same camp. That in the end, what we call reality is something that we co-create, and I'm going to have to stop at that point. I'm probably already being dismissed by some of you by sharing that. I actually went a little bit further. I was thinking of Adam Frank's book. In Adam Frank's book, he introduces Douglas Harding. And Douglas Harding, Harding, who died about 10 years ago, came up with the concept of headlessness. And I wasn't going to talk about it. In fact, I had some slides and I've taken them all out because I thought, whoa, the woo guns will come out and shoot me with that. But I thought, well, Adam Frank is an astrophysicist and he was prepared to promote Douglas Harding. And I thought, well, do I or don't I? I didn't. So I was a bit of a coward. So I don't know what I'm coming over in a coherent way, simply to say that we are co-creating that reality, and I think I'm increasingly comfortable with that. I'm not sure if I answered you well there, but is there anything I missed?
I guess I would sort of no, you answered it well, that you sort of end at mysticism, and that sort of follows on what someone else said, was saying they were asking you about where does knowledge lead to, right?
Yeah.
And my sort of follow up to that and to what you just said now would be, if you're saying that, you know, the mystics ultimately is a little bit where your psychology is at the moment, and the other person said, where does knowledge go? What's your theory about where this ultimately ends up down the track? Have you thought about what would someone in 1,000 years be saying about this topic that we're talking about?
Well, maybe all I can say is, and I tried to convey that in one of my slides, that science is drifting, some aspects of science or some schools of thought is drifting towards that world of reintroducing ontology, which, you know, is trying to, which is another way of saying is bringing it back to the first person experience. And there's an you know, I brought up hopefully enough respectable people to communicate that there is support for some of the assertions that I try to summarize. So there was nothing original. And by the way, there was nothing original in my presentation, as somebody already has raised, but it's the compilation. And so I think in 1,000 years, I would hope that we will have a more comfortable view that time is an emergent phenomena, and that we do have a collective consciousness, that we do tap into that, and yeah, we're getting into the realm where we could say we're living in a virtual reality, and in which we are creating this reality that we are experiencing, because all roads are leading there. I think that's the thing that I get. All roads are leading or pointing in that direction. You can't go to that place. That's, you know, but you can say it's certainly not the world that we have grown up with and that we feel comfortable with. I don't know. That's all I can say. Thank you for your question there.
Thank you, Conrad. Beatrice, your turn.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to stumble a bit on getting all the exact concepts correct, because some of it was a bit new to me, some of it wasn't. One thing that struck me, oh, thank you so much for the breadth of your presentation, by the way. I really appreciated it. And I can deeply empathize with the desire to share everything that you've come up with and the time constraint pressure that you feel in response to that. It struck me frequently throughout your presentation. I was very aware that you were talking about shifts in pretty much like what gets called the hard sciences, and how much, you know, I remember like 30 years ago at uni reading feminist takes on various sciences and Indigenous takes on various sciences. And so in a way, it wasn't, there was a lot in what you were saying that wasn't new to me, but where I'd read it before was very different from where you were speaking from. And so it's gratifying to hear that, you know, to have that demonstration you provided, that people within the hard sciences, people who are taken seriously, are reaching the same conclusions, that there's an inevitable subjectivity to science. And it doesn't mean that you don't try and create meaningful, humans are just driven to create meaning, but if you lose sight of the positionality of the researcher or the, you know, then what are you coming up with? So I guess I hear your kind of concern about going too far into the woo as exactly the kinds of positions that has silenced Indigenous perspectives and things like that from having a meaningful impact on science, because that's just woo. Because, you know, they don't meet the standards of objective, falsifiable, you know, all that stuff. So it's about time for there to be a blending happening there. I did just want to say a little bit about the time thing. if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Which means being a little bit personal, but I'll do it anyway. I have a brain condition that means that I lose time. And so I can experience, because of neurology, like recently, a period of 6 months, I thought it had been a week. And so I guess I just think that there's so much that could still be researched just around the way brains process time, because there are as a lot, or all of you probably know, there are many different parts of the brain involved in different perceptions of time for different purposes within the brain. So it's totally unsurprising that the brain can experience time differently from what people would call real time passing, but that is my reality, and so it's no less real than objective time, because time is a concept and it gets given more weight in society than it deserves, because it's like one of those things we hold on to say that there's structure and it gives us a sense of control about our lives. But when that control gets taken away from you, you have to accept and be a lot more fluid about what time actually means. Yeah, it is, to me, deeply subjective and highly changeable. Yeah, so I don't know, just thought I'd share that. But thank you very much for your presentation. I really got a lot out of it.
Well, thank you, Beatrice. Yeah, look, if I've shaken the tree and some fruit has fallen down, and I just want to like to see people open up a little bit and to sort of stand back and not be sort of hijacked by the common conversations that go on. And yeah, I think your experience of time, can be dismissed as a neurological issue and point to the subjectivity of time. And perhaps there is, it's a pointer. It's hard to, yeah, it's, we've, it's a pointer to the emergence of time as an experience. And of course, you could say, yeah, but that's nonsense. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this wonderful little GPS in the phone in our pockets, and it works so beautifully and it's accurate. How can you talk like that? Yeah, but there are people, as by example, Henri Bergson. He was prepared to stand up against Einstein. He was prepared to, he was a god, in terms of the mathematics, and that was 3 years after time dilation was shown by what's his name, Northhead. Yeah, so there are people that will stand up and say, look, time is an emergent phenomena, but it's yeah. Look, I don't have it. I'm waffling. I'm starting to fall apart, because to me, I feel comfortable that we can develop a new mathematics that replaces, to some extent at least, the tensors that Einstein used to create his general relativity theory. And that would be basically one that relies on that flashlight example that I showed, that we have a virtual space-time, and so time becomes more personal. Yeah, maybe I'm too old now, I think, but I'd love to have a crack at seeing if I could come up with a replacement. I'm brave enough to contemplate it. Anyway, look, Beatrice, thank you. Thank you.
Derek, it's your turn.
Yeah, sure. There's a problem with defining things that Wittgenstein can certainly help us with, especially when we're talking about more basic things like time. But I mean, John Locke said, "What is matter? I know not what." With handing these basic concepts, it's very hard to get to grips with them. Time. I mean, I don't know whether we're talking about the phenomenon of time or the concept of time. Particularly when we're talking about the universality of the concept of time or the phenomenon of time. I'd only like to say that, well, I mean, I've been brought up with the idea, the cliche that that time is a relative. That, you know, if you go on a space journey at a fraction of the speed of light, or sit near a black hole, you know, hundreds of years will pass. You go back home, and you're hundreds of years older in relative to the other people. I mean, I just wanted to say this basic thing, and what do people think about this relativity of time as almost a cliche?
It's a cliche.
Well, because it's so common, I thought. I mean, isn't it part of our, you know, accepted folklore that time is a relative?
It is. It certainly is. But
Yeah.
you know, but once you get that, then I would suggest that we'd also, for example, start to open our minds. I mean, that's really what I'm trying to do, is to chip and say, for example, that the Big Bang didn't happen 13.8 billion years ago, but it's happening now. Again, not an original thought, but I'm delighted to recently reading about the Hubble, so-called Hubble tension, and that is saying, well, actually, it looks as if the Big Bang happened about 1 billion years later. In other words, 12.8 billion years ago. Well, I'm very comfortable to be able to say, well, it's all rubbish, because the Big Bang is just a feature of the universe as we experience it. And so you don't have to go any further than that. Yeah. So there is no absolute time, therefore there is no absolute events. I mean, some of you may be more comfortable with the Minkowski model, you know, the block universe, where all the future and all the past is on this universe, and you have these, what they call them, world lines that link these events. I mean, if you want to, you know, believe in that, go ahead. But you know, there is another way of looking at it, and that's the one that I'm looking at. That's one I wanted to promote this afternoon, and that is, you know, what I was saying, that time is emergent, but we and yeah, and personal. Anyway, thank you, Derek.
Okay, thanks.
I think Derek's gone. The next in line, I think, is Stephen. Are you there, Stephen? No sound. Have we lost sound here? I'm not hearing anything.
Stephen, it's your turn.
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, in the history of philosophy, there's been a little bit of an argument. For example, it used to be assumed there was this thing called reality, and us as creatures which have a central nervous system, we make a model of reality, you know, and we have a thing called a mind which creates a model of the reality. And, you know, there's sort of arguments of going in between Kant and Schopenhauer. And when they started to think along those lines, there's a big argument as to, well, yeah, mainly we see our own model of reality, our own representation. For example, this can be quite sophisticated. We can be in a dream and we can suddenly see an entire world with people in it, which, as far as we know, is just largely a representation in our own mind. Now, certain philosophers, who are best not mentioned, came to the conclusion that the whole cosmos was simply thought. That is, we'll exclude reality and just say everything's just representation anyway.
Mm.
And yeah, well, Schopenhauer, for example, believed that there must be something of reality we experience directly. something was there. That was Schopenhauer's position. And so I suppose the question is, what is our model? What is the potential for our representation? Let's say we've got a human species. I'd have a limit to what they could represent in relationship to reality. There might be things unknown and things that humanity can never know. You know, you might have to become an agnostic at some point. And so that's the question. Is the representation a reality of some kind? Or is the real reality only the real reality out there, and is our representation purely an image of that reality? Thank you.
Yeah. I think I can't build on that. The only comment and response is, you know, we are observing an experience, and the question is the universe actually, and picking up Martin Rees. Remember, I introduced a slide of Martin Rees, who is the astronomer royal, and he said that basically saying there was no Big Bang without an observer being present, which you could translate and extrapolate and say, well, look, this is ultimately a single observer universe, and that we're all experiencing this universe almost the same, but with a different flavor.
Yeah, this is this sort of idea, this concept that without a representation, a being to represent it, that reality can't exist.
Yes. Yeah.
Which sounds a little bit lunatic to me, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Steve, it sounds lunatic to me, but you know, once I spent so much time on this presentation, and I got so absorbed by to the point where I'm saying, look, there is substance in this. You must press on. And in fact, this is probably my last presentation, because I'm going to translate this into a book, because I think I've got enough there, material and logic and some that I haven't shared today, simply wanted time to be able to say, look, this is where things are pointing to. And yeah, thanks again for your question, Steve.
Thank you. Conrad, your turn. Conrad. No.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm here. Two questions for you. The first one is, you mentioned that the 13.8 billion years ago idea with your emergent time alternative being now, right? That is happening, you know, over and over again. That's my question. I'll ask you a question about that, then I'll have a follow-up. So my question to you is, let's just say that you're correct. Let's just say that 13.8 billion idea of the universe turns out not to be quite correct. And maybe let's just say that you are correct. So my first question to you, and I'll have a follow-up, is what would that mean to you if that was true?
Well, you know, my first response is, you know, that Einstein showed that there is no absolute time. There is no time anywhere in the universe that is more absolute than another. It's all relative, and in that framework of thinking. In that framework of thinking, it's not a question of whether time is emergent. It's the experience of time that is questions. How can you reason that there was a Big Bang? Because There is no absolute time. I mean, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense to talk about 13.8 billion years. And again, I will hide behind a more reputable, Stephen Hawking who reasoned that as well. So it's not a question of whether time is emergent. It's whether time is absolute or relative. So you can take it a step further, but you don't need to go to that. It's simply to say that time is relative. Anyway, Conrad, if that answers your question, you mentioned a second question related to that.
Well, still part of the first one was, okay, you just corrected me correctly, which is, if that was true, what would that mean to you? Well, like I'm talking about if we understand that we're meaning-seeking creatures, we're desperate to understand things, what does that actually mean to you if this book you're going to write is true? How would that change how you live your life, or how you think, or how you anything? What's different after that fact?
Well, it's that sense of self that is destroyed that that sense of death, which is somewhat closer to me than most of you here, and that really one doesn't die. It's the that you live on. And in fact, I saw a recent article which talked about sustaining of memory of some of the bacteria. It's almost as if that there is a sense of me that lives on, that when after I die there will be something still alive, and it just has taken a different form. It sounds, what can I say? You asked me a very personal question. It's a great question, by the way. I'm taking note. I'm taking note of these. So very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad. Jody, unmute yourself.
Hello, am I audible?
Scott, hello, Scott. Yes,
Yeah,
you're
hello. Yeah,
audible.
what a coincidence. Just Thursday night in one of David Miller's satellite groups, it's called Scott and Dave's High Ontology, we were discussing Hume and the explosion of the unity of the self that happens if you hold close to your heart sensation. If you hold close to your heart intention, then you get unity. You persist through time. If you hold close to your heart the transcendence that concepts have across time and space, then you're unity. But if you hold close to your heart sensation, then you find that you become plural. And if you hold it hard enough, then you'll become actually plural. And this is the method of Buddhism. And then what do you have? Nothing. Everything's all open up, and that's supposed to be the end. That's the happiest thing you'd ever do. But aren't we interested in the compulsions that define the self? And so here's a fun exercise. Hold sensations close to heart until you atomize. You break up into tiny bits. And then see what the different flavors of selfhood are that come back. And which ones you need to have running, and which ones you don't have to have running. They might be accidental, like chemical, like mood type things. But some of them are necessary. You have to have some of these things have to be running. And I thought to myself, people like simplicity so much. There's nothing I like more than a simple story. And so I just had this compulsion to find a single unifying theme. And then I think that fucks up everything. I think it's a really bad habit. So in Western metaphysics, sometimes they just even use the word one. Like Kant, for example, he just says unity, and he has this weird functionalist metaphysics where there's no real stuff in the self. It's just pure unity, and that's the whole thing. But in India, they've got a gigantic list of all the different flavors of consciousness that come back when you recombine yourself. And I think it's very interesting, and I wish I was more comfortable with complexity. I think I'd be better off in my life. But yeah, I should probably print the list in there. But one of them is witness consciousness, the mere fact that the lights are on. That's actually miraculous. We don't appreciate that very much. But the fact that the lights are on and lights can sting, it's amazing. Okay, so it's that. Uh, then this other one is the ability to distinguish. It's a fundamental power. And sometimes you don't use it, but we have the ability to distinguish. What kind of side effects does that have? And that's called the faculty of discrimination, buddhi. And then another one is my favorite, the eye maker. There's something about the self that it treasures itself and it wants to be a self and it's trying to convince itself that it's something. What the hell is that? Oh, and it creates this idea of mindness, you know, the possessive tense. And I think that we have this relationship to our own interior stuff, and that's a weird thing. And then there's four more. I'm not going to bore you with the list, but I thought, you know, these Indians they were really good scientists about consciousness because whenever they sat down and meditate, they always brought a stopwatch and a notepad, and they tried to list out all the stuff that was happening. And I think there's more than one thing going on with the self. But I think the funnest method is to destroy yourself first, and then I think this must be the best way to do it. First, you have to destroy everything, and then let things come back. You know, your normal self, let it return back, and try to catch the things as they come in. And that'd be a fun thing to do. If only I could tolerate complexity, and didn't desire to sum everything up under one umbrella. Thanks.
Okay. Or well, and you're Scott, not Jody. I'll take it. Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Scott.
Yeah, Scott. Okay. Hey, Scott. I recommend you might like to read Douglas D.E. Harding's book on headlessness, and I think you know he is actually dealing, as I interpret what you were saying, with that very thing. That he argues that you can't see your own head. You can't see it. And so with that too, the persona that we have adopted is an accretion of our experiences from the moment we were born and lying in our cot. His evolution of reasoning was picked up in Adam Frank's book, The Blind Spot. So yeah, have a read of Douglas Harding's book. And I think that, another philosopher that explored it was Timothy Freak. Again, talking in a similar sort of way, although he talks about the inversion. Anyway, just dropping names there. Thanks, Scott.
I think Scott wants to reply.
Thanks. Thank you very much. You know, what a coincidence, because last night I got all excited and stuttering about the Chinese Buddhist version of the thing that you're talking about, the headlessness. I put a link there. This is so much, you know, people love Japanese koans. They think that's so interesting and witty. This is so much better. This is the Chinese headlessness method, where you ask questions like, who's dragging this corpse around?
Yes.
That's what you ask. Isn't that funny? Who's dragging? I mean, you're talking about yourself. Who's dragging this corpse around? And you try to have an understanding of your own will, which is impossible, as you know. And so these are fun little exercises you can do, and it gets rid of the disease, I guess, that Remco was talking about, which is the accretion of false self that the eye maker makes, which I think is actually a good evolutionary thing, to panic and have an ego. I think it actually helps us survive. But it causes all sorts of psychological problems. So if you could stop your genetic instinct of self-preservation, and by asking these weird questions, you'll be selfless and you'll have less anxiety. Anyway, this is the Chinese analog of Remco's headlessness. That's it.
Yeah, and you know, it's an issue, and even Einstein was confronted in a conversation in Princeton, where he said, "You mean to say that there is no moon when we are not looking?" Huh? You know, it has that same. You know, it's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge, and hence my slide as well on that what I call the peekaboo phenomena of quantum mechanics. Anyway, thank you, Scott.
Les, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Now, before I talk about models, just on the moon disappearing when we're not looking at it, problem with idealism, that there is no objective mind-independent reality. I put to an idealist the other day, it's even worse than that. If you're an idealist and you think things only exist when observed, then you actually don't have a brain and you don't have a heart this very moment because you're not observing your brain and heart. Anyway, to get to models, so thanks, Remco, for a very wide-ranging discussion and talk. Now, you know I'm a thoroughgoing realist, so I've got lots of points of contention with many of the things you were saying in your talk. So I just want to pick up on one, and that's about models. And you're making the good point that models are not reality, but I'm not sure who you were directing that to, because I think you'd be hard pressed to find a scientist who thought that the model was reality. I don't know of any scientists who said that the model is reality. And just to flesh out how that works in practice with your kind of view. So you were talking about global warming, and you were talking about the climate model that we have to show that shows incontestably that the climate is warming, and it's going to already is leading to quite deleterious consequences with floods and hurricanes and fires. So my thought is, well, your thought was even more radical than the model is not reality, which we all agree with. Your thought was that our models don't represent reality. There is no mind-independent reality for models to represent. They're kind of like in your Wittgensteinian talk. Models are just our way of speaking. And I'm thinking, then where are we at then with global warming? If our global warming models and our thoughts about global warming are only just our way of speaking, you know, our language game, then why the heck would we be concerned about what the models are predicting with higher temperatures, more floods, more failed crops? Why don't we then just change our language game? Why don't we just change our way of speaking? And then the problem of global warming disappears. Now, of course, you know that what I'm getting to here is, and this is what I'm thinking you at a maybe subconscious level, you agree with me that our climate change models are not just ways of speaking, not just Wittgensteinian language games, that they're actually telling us something really, really, really important about what we're doing to the environment, and that we better get off our asses and actually do something about it, because in reality, we're already facing more fires, more floods, more hurricanes, and so on. So, you know, we recognize that there is an objective reality out there. That's why we're listening to these global warming climate models. They're telling us something real about the world. Thanks, Remco.
Yeah, thank you, Les. A good one. Yeah, good question, and good examples. You said you said that you don't know anybody that is confusing the models for reality. I think you were saying. Well, my response is, for example, the wave function. To explain entanglement, they talk about a collapse of the wave function, and that the wave function, and this is, you know, you could use the word decoherence if you like, but let's you know, whichever you like. The very utterance of the word collapse, you know, makes it sound like something is happening out there. Furthermore, they even talk about a wave function that straddles the whole universe. It's the only way they can explain entanglement. Now, isn't that Les, reifying something which is a description of what we observe? And so you have a group headed by, what's his name, Fuchs, who is a cubist, and he's saying, no, the wave function doesn't collapse out there. He says, and that it is a description of our beliefs of the system we are trying to describe. So he's trying to get away from that argument. So there is an example of somebody that that is challenging the model of the wave function as an example. and I could go on. Does that satisfy your first point?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the collapse of the wave functions got to do with how our models represent reality, because quantum mechanics or quantum field theory is not the only scientific model there is. I mean, there are thousands of models, so I'm not sure of the relevance. But the talk of the collapse of the wave function is just one of something like at least a dozen theories about how to interpret what happens when uh, when a classical system interferes with a wave or a field. It's only one of a number of theories about what's happening there. So let's not just accept that the collapse of the wave function is the only way of thinking about what happens when we measure.
No. Um, uh, the only one that I'm aware of is that very description as a decoherence or a collapse. I'm not aware of any other description as a thing, as a phenomena, as I described. Can you example another one just to clarify what you're saying? Can you give me an example of an alternative view to that? Because I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, like the hidden variables view, what is it? The multi-universe model with a branching model. From what I understand, there are these other interpretations of what happens when the quantum system interacts with a classical system. They don't use the terminology, they eschew the terminology of the collapse.
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay, but in that, okay, certainly Everett's belief in a multiverses, infinite universes to avoid the abhorrence of having this wave function. Yeah, sure. We go and hold to it. I can't comment. All I could say is what's wrong with accepting that it is describing in a Bayesian sense our understanding about a system as Christopher Fuchs, yeah, that's his name, as a cubist represent. It seems it's a minority view, but it would be consistent with all the other enigmas that we're dealing with, and in particular the peekaboo experience. I mean, the peekaboo dual slit is a classic example where I think we're getting lost in the in the language, in the description of events, which we've created as enigma with alternatives, and we needn't do that. We can simply say this is what we experience as observers, and that is it. You can call it in a Wittgensteinian sense, or you could say it in any other. You can in Husserl's view as well as a phenomenologist. That's what I would say. And
So on the maybe more substantive, more impacts our real life concern about models. If our models are just our ways of speaking, just language games, when it comes to climate change, there seems to be an argument there. Then why don't we just change our model? Why don't we just change our way of speaking? And then the climate problem goes away.
That would help. Yes, definitely. Yeah, we need to, not the problem goes away, but it becomes more a phenomenal expression. We're having a global warming. We're not having climate change. I don't know what climate is. I don't know what change is. It is something that you can quantify and as a scientist come up with. Sure, it's global warming. Why are we evading the direct issue with the direct experience of global warming and use that information that we've garnished in that graph, not graph, but that assembly of graphs of details of expressions of global warming? It is global warming, and then we have a direct way of enrolling the community into the fact that, hey, it is heating up. Let's be direct. That's really what I'm saying. The phenomenologist is coming out in my responding to you and say, bring it to the first person. It's warming up. That's it.
Yeah, but you're speaking like a realist when you say this is important stuff we need to take notice. If it's just a language game, You know, I'm not, my argument is not about what we call the model, whether it's a climate change model or a global heating model. That's not my point. The point is, does the model reflect what the reality? And if it's not really reflecting reality, if it's only a way of speaking, then we can just change our way of speaking, and then the problem goes away.
Absolutely. Bring it to a first person basis and recognize that we're dealing with a description where we're uttering words. And by changing it, we will enroll the community. Because at the moment, the scientists are like, in my description, behaving like priests. They're behaving like what I call a conclave. You know, the COP is a conclave of priests. They're not there. They're people that are uttering in a foreign language. Now, I'm a scientist, Les, and I can jump into that group. I could be in COP and talk their language, but I'm saying, hey, get out of that, get to the people, bring it to the first person.
But I thought you were worried. I thought you were worried about global warming and about its real life impacts on human beings. I thought you were worried about it.
Of course I am.
Yeah, well, my point is, if global warming, the global warming model is just a way of speaking, you know, you're a big fan of Wittgenstein. If it's just a way of speaking, if it's just a language game, then on that framing of it, on your framing of it, then I would advise let's just change our language game, and then, you know, there won't be more floods, more fires, and so on because we've changed our way of speaking.
No, the causal link is something else again. It's the getting the conversation right in the first place. It's like the double slit experiment. It's we need to change the conversation, and we don't have an enigma. If we change the conversation, we have an experience. If we change the conversation about global warming, you know, from climate change to global warming, we get a change of experience. We get a change in enrollability. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, look, I think it's perhaps we should have a webinar on communication and perhaps there might be some interesting dialogue that evolves from that.
Thanks,
you.
Remco. Thanks, Remco.
John, your turn.
Right, thank you. I just have a matter of clarification. You mentioned the name of the person, Timothy Frecker.
Yeah.
Now, there is a Timothy Frecker who was very interested in subjective mysticism, and he wrote a rather controversial book with Peter Gandy, The Jesus Mysteries. Was the Jesus a pagan Jew? Now, this was a Timothy Frecky, but it could be that there are two Timothy Freckys. In the meantime, I can recommend that this book is extremely interesting in relation to Christian origins. That's my question of clarification.
All right. Thank you, John. Look, I read the book and it's Freke. And if we're talking about the same person, look, I hadn't looked at the pronunciation, but he wrote a book called Lucid Living. I read it years ago. And it possibly is by the same person, and his theme was, and it's consistent with sort of with everything that I've said today. That in a way you could look at experience of the world as we are not in the world. It was as Timothy Frecker or Freke. We're not in the world, but the world is in us. And that was his thesis, which is consistent with the experience of quantum mechanics and would be consistent with the experience of general relativity, or its revision, as I'm proposing, have outlined. And it's consistent with a lot of Eastern ways of thinking. And I think we need to look more at the Eastern ways of thinking, as did David Bohm with his long dialogues with Krishnamurti, for example. We tend to dismiss them as sort of being, you know, talking in la land with topics, but you know, they have something to contribute, and we need to listen. And now we're too isolated here in the West with our own dialogue, with our own language game, and it has taken us away and created what I see as a monster of what science is today. It's not a monster; it's a bit emotive, it's a bit strong, but we've gone off the rails in our sort of way of you know, describing and using mathematics and using that to as reality. Anyway, I'm sort of repeating myself now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That the mystical dimension, the Christian churches themselves have tried to have nothing to do with Timothy Freckey. You don't see him discussed anywhere in Christian circles, although he is dealing with such basic issues in relation to early religion. So it was very interesting that you brought that up, and he certainly, I think he's a very important figure. Actually, eventually he will have his day, I think.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Scott, Jody, go ahead.
Okay.
Whoops. Sorry, you got muted. Go ahead now.
All right. Oh yeah, never mind. I was going to say something about modeling and how there's different levels of modeling. Like there is a high level of modeling that is actually can be shaped by culture and stuff like that. But there might be aspects of modeling that we can't help doing, and so it might be the case that all of our models share some universal contaminant that's still probably not actually really true, but just something that we have to do in order to understand it. And then that was like 20 minutes ago, and now I don't want to talk about it anymore. And I need some more coffee. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Right. Okay.
Scott, can
Conrad.
I on to that though? It's again, Scott, not a question of the models not having a role. They have a very important role, but it's how we use the models and recognize they are a description of our experience. So one of Newton's laws: a body in motion remains in motion. Well, that is our experience, but we've reified it to be a phenomena of the thing. But so that's the shift. That's the shift I'm talking about, is how we use the models. But thank you.
Conrad, your turn.
Thank you. I want you to imagine that, Remco, you were the representative of Earth, and there was a spaceship heading towards Earth of an advanced civilization, and those people landed. They got off the spaceship, and you were the one person allowed to speak to them, and they could speak English. What would you say to them?
I need some help on that one. What would I say to them? They speak English, but they're coming off another planet. Can I take that on notice? Because that is
Yeah, go.
yeah,
Sure.
that is an interesting question. I mean, Wittgenstein made a comment that you could never have a conversation with a lion because they would never. We could not learn a lionese. It is impossible for us to have a conversation beyond perhaps some issues of food and etc. So I'm thinking in terms of your aliens, and yeah.
I mean, you got one chance. You've got 2 minutes to talk to them. That's all you got.
Yeah. I don't know. You'll have to think about that one. A good one, Conrad. You're obviously a thinker. I'm sorry. I think maybe my brain is a little bit frizzled after technical challenges before my webinar and then dealing with my webinar, with my slides. I'm sorry. I'll have to duck that one, but it's good. It's a good question. I'll think about it.
That's good. Thank you.
Stephen, your turn.
So just wondering, Remco, your opinion on, the condition of science at the moment. For example, you have somebody like Sabine Hossefender or whatever her name is on the YouTube, and she's getting a bit nasty today and these days, and
spilling the beans, you know, proclaiming that a lot of the academic science that's going on now is just simply fraud, and the whole ambition is simply to keep the show going and keep the gravy train in process. And they know a lot of the stuff they're doing is pointless, but the important thing is to keep their meal ticket going. This seems to be a process of corruption which really started to grow perhaps in the late 70s or in the 80s when greed became the god. You know, greed is good, therefore greed is the god. And so we have a scientific community today which, as a collective, are liars. Is that the problem we've got at the moment? We're actually going, you know, downhill. The Enlightenment has put a noose around its neck and tightened it till it strangled itself. That was the position of Spengler. He said they fail to realise what is destroying the Enlightenment, is the Enlightenment is killing itself. So I was wondering what your position would be on that.
Look, I love Sabina Hossenfelder. She's you know, she's a bit like you, Stephen. She speaks her mind, and yeah, I think I think I've seen a similar one of a presentation of hers about a year ago, which she said most of the papers are rubbish. They're just building on houses on straw foundations. You know, there is a Turkish, and that's where I come from. You know, there's a Turkish quotation maxim, which is, when you're on the wrong road, stop and turn around and go back. And I think, you know, it'd be fair to say that, you know, science in a way has evolved to produce beautiful goodies, and there's no question of that. But in terms of the fundamentals, the very essence where I was treading today between quantum mechanics and relativity, there is a gulf. And we haven't straddled it, and we're locked into the goodies that both of them are producing, the goodies, and we're not prepared to go into this domain of looking at for example, what energy is, and to step back and say, well, if we look at it differently, would we not, and as I attempted to do today, would we not produce an alternative to general relativity? And would that not reconcile with quantum mechanics? Now, that is, you know, it's going a couple of steps beyond where even the lead scientists are, such as Carlo Rovelli and my mind is not working too well. You know, so yeah, we need to step back because we're not producing goodies. We're being seduced by the vaccines that we're able to, you know, for COVID in a very short time under the label of science. Yes, true, all of that. But the fundamentals of science hasn't advanced in 100 years. The very essence hasn't really. We've improved our descriptive skills. We've got, you know, the standard model. We've got, you know, the wave function. We've got all of these things. But the fundamentals haven't changed. We've got a gap. And that gap, I would suggest, is what I was talking about today. Perhaps my title should be Bridging the Gap. Just like in philosophy, you know, there are two schools of philosophy. The English-speaking world that sees no other form of philosophy. I noticed there was a comment on that. And I'm saying, well, look, there's another, the continental school, the postmodernists included, you know, they have an alternative angle, and you know, it's uncomfortable for many of us. It's a different way of thinking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Beatrice, unmute yourself.
Thanks. Yeah. I have a question, but first I'll make a statement. I don't know, to my understanding, just coming back to the climate crisis thing, the reason the terminology around it would change wasn't to hide what was happening. It was actually because there are places in the world where it's very easy for people to say it's not getting hotter here because the melting of the polar ice caps and stuff is actually bringing cool changes. So it was about trying to challenge the denial by saying, okay, it might not be hotter where you are, but look at these fires, look at these floods. It's like broadening the umbrella so that, you know, those people who want to think simplistically about it can't just say, well, it's not hotter here, it's all bullshit. But anyway, that's just my take on it. I could be wrong. I just thought that that's where that shift came from in labeling. But then that's exactly the point that I wanted to ask about. I guess I just wanted to check my understanding around what you were saying around that, because like to my way of thinking, it's not that there aren't climatic shifts happening that we need to respond to. It's just that there needs to be a duality of awareness in the mind, that the models that we use are models, and that any model can, like just by nature of being a theoretical model, can have errors in it, it can have misunderstandings, it can have biases. The model isn't the thing itself, and we have to respond to the thing itself.
Yes.
So if we get waylaid by the model and get weighed down in debating the model and politicsing the model and all the rest of it, we're ignoring the thing itself, which is crucially important, you know, and keeping us alive. And that can be a difficult thing to navigate, because our brains intrinsically try and delineate a self and an other or an object, and, you know, like strive for objective reality constantly. And that's a jewel of humanity, but it's also one of our biggest weaknesses, that we can get too enamored of our understanding. So it's just more about trying to hold the duality. Is that like of objective subjective experience, or like a version of reality that our mind holds on to versus the the complexity of what's actually happening moment by moment?
Yeah, it's not so much how we. It's about the direct personal experience and staying with that. Use the science, but bring it back to the actual phenomena of that experience, of that change. And then we have a different, slightly different conversation. It's bringing it back to the experience. And once you do that, you haven't got an opening for the problems that you've identified, such as with climate change, where the orange man in America was talking about, well, what's this global warming? It's actually cold here. You know, look at the freezing that's going on. This is decontextualized. And that's the opening that is being created by dehumanizing science. Science is about us. We are the center. We are it. And if we change our science to we are it, then you look at the vocabulary, the way we talk, and we can then you don't create these what's the word, luminaire, you know, these little chambers where people can go off and have their little powwow about, you know, where the glaciers are retreating and all of that. Hey, that is supporting material, yes, but the experience is, hey, the world overall is warming, and it's 1.5. We've broken the 1.5 degree average temperature already. We're projecting that a decade ahead. That is communicating, and that way we're creating, you know, by bringing it back to our experience, then we have a much more powerful conversation, and we can harness what are currently being the conversation of the priests. We don't, you know, we like in religions, we've substituted priests and Bibles and Torahs and Korans. You know, we're substituting that for living directly with people, and I think it's a false. You know, we're creating this false connection with the world, and that's where I'm coming from, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like, because if you can hold subjectivity, like the awareness of also subjectivity, then science becomes a voice in the conversation that doesn't shut out, for example, the knowledge of Indigenous Australians about how to deal with bushfire threats and things like that. Whereas if science is God, then those voices are shut out of that conversation, and the lived experience and built up knowledge is taken out of the conversation. So it's like, just people want a simple answer, but you've got to be able to live with a complex reality. But science is very good at trying to fill the gap of the desire for a simple, or at least an absolute answer, when often there isn't one.
Yeah. Yeah, look, a little digression, but when I lived in Perth, I got involved, and I got it because I was doing some work in India, and totally out of left field for me. I got involved with the Swan River, and I was presented with a mountain of data and information, and was summarized in various government reports. The reports were bullshit. I mean, to be blunt, they were glossy. They promoted what the government was doing, but they had pollution standards which were targets which were unachievable. They had legislation that was not workable, and the government was able to, and with suitable use of oxygenators on the river, were able to suppress the symptoms. All it needed was a direct, and that's why I was encouraging the involvement of the Aboriginal people, because these people would immediately identify the problem and would expose the facade of millions of dollars. Lord knows how many tens of millions of dollars had been wasted on that river by, I failed. I got this one. I got a 400-page report as a legacy, and it's one of my regrets in life that I could not get traction. As part of the reason I also left Perth and will relocate myself in Melbourne shortly. It's one of the hypocrisies of so much that goes on, and the charade of science being used to hide deeper issues. And that's what science is often used for. It's used as it's used as a facade to legitimize a lot of things that are not appropriate, and hiding other things where there is opportunities for change. And yeah, look, and I noted how different New Zealand is, or was, and I think it's changing over there now, how different New Zealand is to Australia in terms of the way it addresses pollution. But they actually got the farmers, who were this major source of pollution, as champions of the rivers, for example. It's quite amazing. And it's all about the conversation. And that's why I'm so passionate about the topic. I tried to present in such a short time, and hopefully not compromise myself too much in the process. Anyway, thank you for your question.
Jody, Scott, go ahead.
Yes, okay. What the hell? Oh, something's wrong.
We can hear you, so just.
Okay, yeah. Let's see. Okay. All right, well, I was just thinking that what the hell was it? This idea of modeling, and I guess I'm always trying to learn something new about Kant, because I feel guilty for not ever doing anything or writing anything. So I realized that his whole method is to substitute necessary ways of modeling for what used to be called metaphysics. The activity formerly known as metaphysics, like Prince, remember the artist formerly known as Prince? The activity formerly known as metaphysics was to be replaced. It began with Descartes, and then Kant realized, well, actually, we can do something. What if it turns out that all modeling, all understanding, shares some core set of little activities? Can we, is there some minimalist recipe? I mean, are there some ingredients in any understanding recipe that all understanding recipes have to have? If so, haven't we found something? So that's the sad victory that Kant had. Back in the old days, philosophers wanted to know the meat of reality. Then once they realized that nervous systems construct reality, they were all depressed. And Kant said, wait a minute, there's one last victory we can have. And the victory was the way that these nervous systems have to model. If it's true that the ways of modeling are necessary for all modelers, then what does that mean? That means that we found necessary universal truth. And then in parentheses, about all modeled things. Isn't that nice? So I think putting it that way makes this phenomenology really clear. It's not a weird phenomenology of this goddamn computer. It's not a weird phenomenology of saying that my red sensation is a phantom and it's not the real red, or my red sensation is a phantom and it's not the real wavelength. It's not. That's not what his phenomenology is. His phenomenology says that the red that we get in our experience is the real thing. So he's a super realist. Actually, it's offensively realistic. When he comes to sensations, he says they are the things. I thought that sensations were like the body's echoes of things. But Kant says that they are the things. That's very hardcore. So his phenomenology, meaning his story about how appearance is forced to do the work of being, comes in not the stuff, but in the way that we put stuff together and make a model. So he's like, here's a small list of things that all models must have if they're going to even be models, and that's his substitution for what used to be called metaphysics, which was a list of occult truths behind the flux of sensation. Well, there are occult truths behind the flux of sensation. They're the ways that you have to understand things, and they always weave themselves into the things that you understand. So all objects of understanding are contaminated by your modeling acts, these necessary acts. Isn't that nice? So that's it. That's the way. I'm always trying to figure out a new way to make things clearer and simpler for myself. So I think that modeling, that's what he was doing. He was substituting the rules of modeling. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, okay. So modeling, mathematics is just a language. It's a language game, and that's it. We use the models, but it's how we interpret the models and place the models that's at issue. There's no problem about any of that, and just recognize that mathematics is a powerful tool, but let's not forget that it is just a language, and a language for description. And as long as we recognize that, then it's automatically placed. It's automatically placed with the right mindset. And I include in that general relativity theory. It is describing our experience of time. And it takes energy. And so, anyway, blah, blah. Look, have a second. I just want to put the lights on. It's getting a bit dark in here. And
Go ahead.
Or at the same time, it's getting a bit cool here. Right, and one more button, and I shall be back.
Very good.
Okay, a little bit of light.
Yes.
I don't know what I look like, but anyway. Okay.
Now Muri is having trouble with his microphone, so he's put his question in the chat. I'll read it out. He says, Muri says, my question is, if science must include the first person view to be truly complete, how can we ensure this doesn't weaken its ability to deliver consistent, testable, and universally reliable results, especially in high-stakes fields like medicine, aviation, or nuclear engineering, where lives depend on objective standards?
Oh, absolutely. Muri always comes up with good questions. I remember from a previous time. Thank you for that, Muri. It's a good question. I mean, again, one of the things I addressed today was labeling, and how labeling can be used to dispense with fundamental problems. And I included those three from quantum mechanics. We can't explain them, but rather than putting labeling and filing it away, putting it in a drawer, to then say, okay, well, how could we look at it in a different way? And once we do that, then what you've described then become peripheral and supporting issues. In other words, you know, we can then reinterpret or reapply the objective science that you talked about and use it for our benefit. But by changing the conversation, you're forcing the people that are doing the relevant research, you know, you're describing broadly, you're forcing them to harmonize into the ultimate language game, the ultimate objective, the ultimate outcome, which is the phenomena that you're dealing with, the experience. I don't know whether I'm making sense, but yeah, that's, yes.
Well, thank you, Rem.